What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 760. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, breakfast burrito in hand. I just finished mine. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you ready to do set review?
Yeah, and the timing has actually worked out pretty well because I got to do a bunch of drafts during early access yesterday. So I've actually gotten to play with a lot of these cards and I've got formed more opinions and all that. So I'm looking forward to jamming here.
Sweet. That's awesome. We're going to go over every single common and uncommon in Bloomburrow today. And next week, we'll have the rare and mythic rare plus bonus sheet show as well. First, we want to say thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon. Patreon's a place you can go to support your favorite content creators. And it really ends up being kind of the backbone for a lot of content creators, including us. And we really appreciate each and every person who does so. If you do sign up for ours, you get access to our Patreon feed for things like the Patreon question of the week and questions for guests. And you also get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, no matter what level you're at. So check it out. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And again, thank you so much to everybody who supports us. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard. That's right. They make the best stuff in the business. If you're looking for ways to protect your cards, your decks, your collection, excuse me, Ultimate Guard is the best place to go. You can check out ultimateguard.com to see their full line of products. They're the best. You hold them in your hand and you're like, wow, these are really well thought out, really premium materials, and they work. Fantastic function and form combining there over at Ultimate Guard, and they're always coming up with cool new stuff. If you do want to pick up something, you can go to your favorite local game store or your favorite online retailer and pick up something from Ultimate Guard. Thank you so much for your sponsorship, Ultimate Guard. Luis, we're going to be going over every single common and uncommon today, and that means that we're going to have discussion about the card to kind of break it down, and then we're going to put a punctuation mark in the form of our grading scale.
Yeah, so the grading scale we use is an A through F scale with 2 subgrades, and it starts with A's, bombs, game winners, cards that are good in many situations, especially when behind, and just the best cards in the set. We're talking cards like Ocelot Pride or Guide of Souls. Not going to see too many A's, I would imagine, during the common uncommon review. Those typically cluster in the rares, but every now and then a card sneaks in there. B's, we'll see plenty of these. These are cards that actively pull you towards their colors, headliners for a set, go-to cards, and a reason to be in a particular color pair. This Bloomburrow is, I think, most likely going to be color pairs. Like you're not that likely to be 3 colors. I don't think the set's super set up for that, which I don't mind because we've had a couple 5-color sets, it feels like, in the last couple. Solid removal often falls into the B range as well. We're talking cards like Marionette Apprentice or Malevolent Rumble. Just a good solid card you're pretty happy to take in the first couple picks and will always make your deck. C's are playable. These are the pawns of limited. They're pretty interchangeable, and you're going to end up with some amount of them in your deck. You don't feel bad when you play them, but you're not like super excited. We're talking cards like Dog Umbra or Fanged Flames. D's are the cards that you do feel better at running. These are sometimes playable, and you'd really rather not if they were in your deck. They're kind of cards that are kind of mediocre, junky, maybe situational, have a high setup cost. Cards like Electrozoa or Thriving Skyclaw, just not the best of the business. And then F's are cards that are just basically straight up unplayable. Super narrow, cost 10 mana, kind of interact with planeswalkers only, that sort of thing. So we're talking cards like Ruby Medallion or Urza's Incubator, just cards that are not very good. And then the 2 subgrades, we've got sideboard, cards that rarely make the main deck or aren't very good in the main deck, but are very good out of the sideboard. Cards like Meltdown, for example. You would never main deck Meltdown, but when you sided in against Black-Red Artifacts, that was one of the best cards in your deck. So sideboard grades can be a very strong card in the right situation. And then build around. These are cards that on their own won't do enough, but if you build around them, if you enable them, they can be something that is the kind of North Star for your whole deck. Cards like Ether Revolt. You first pick an Ether Revolt, your whole deck is going to try to be about energy. And if you get there, Ether Revolt is excellent. So we've got these subgrades. We've got our grades. Let's get into the mechanics and kind of what's going on in this set so you have an idea before we jump in. Bloomburrow is a funny set. It's kind of like the world of Redwall, if you read those books, the Brian Jackson books.
That's what it reminded me of, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's also Secret of Nim inspired. Just all it's basically a bunch of woodland creatures, and that's like the setting. One of the main themes going on is actually creature types. And the best way I've found to describe it is each color pair has a type We'll go through those in a sec. And what that means also is each color has 4 different creature types associated with it. So, for example, red-black is lizards, red-green is raccoons, red-white is mice, red-blue is otters, and that leaves red as lizards, raccoon, mice, and otters are all found in red. So you'll see cards that refer to, like Splash Portal, the blue exile creature, it comes back. And then if it wasn't one of these types, you draw a card, and those types are bird, frog, rat, or otter. Those are the 4 blue creature types. So we've got lizards, raccoon, mice, otters as red, black, red, green, red, white, red, blue. Blue, white is birds. Blue, green is frogs. Blue, black is rats. White, green is rabbits. White, black is bats. And black, green is squirrels. And each of these creatures has like a kind of themed or mechanic going with them. For the most part, they're not all new. And, some of these mechanics and stuff are found in other cards as well. But when you see a raccoon, like it's more likely it has expend. That's the red-green mechanic, and the raccoons tend to work together. One of the things that's kind of nice is everyone can really tell the difference. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell the difference between a bat and a squirrel and an otter or what have you. Animals are pretty easy to identify. And in general, the animals work with the animals of their own type pretty well. So if you have a deck that has a couple otters in it, you're more likely than not to want more otters, even if they're not literally rewarding you for the creature type otter, because they have similar aims. We'll get through all those as we go. Offspring is one of the cool mechanics where there's an offspring cost on a creature. It's a kind of kicker. And when you pay that cost, you get, as an additional cost to cast it, you also get a 1/1 token that's a copy of that creature. So let's take Bushy Bodyguard, for example. It's 1 and a green for a 2/1 squirrel warrior, an uncommon. It has offspring 2. So you can pay 2 extra mana, get a 1/1 copy of it. And when Bushy Bodyguard enters, you can forage, which is the squirrel mechanic, which means you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sack of food. And if you do, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on the bodyguard. Well, the copy can also forage and also get the counters, depending on what you want. Likewise, there's like a frog that taps a creature and gets a stun counter. It has offspring. You get a 1/1 version that also taps a creature and also puts a stun counter. So offspring is often on creatures with mechanics that work well when you get another copy of them. Sometimes there's not. Like there's a 4/4 raccoon for 4. That if it has offspring, makes a 1/1, and they can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. But the 1/1 version of that isn't like super synergistic, whereas tap a creature, you definitely want a second copy of. Offspring means there's going to be a bunch of creature tokens. It's a good mana sink. There's a lot going on there. Valiant is the mouse mechanic. This is when it's like heroic, except it also works on abilities. So whenever a creature with Valiant becomes the target of a spell or ability that you control, for the first time each turn, it's only 1 per turn, it does a thing. For example, Mouse Trapper is 2 and a white for a 3/2 with flash, and it has Valiant, tap a creature an opponent controls. So anytime you target Mouse Trapper once per turn, you get to tap one of their creatures. And there's creatures that get a +1/+1 counter. There's like all these different things. Gift is a funny mechanic that is not tied to a specific creature type or color pair. But what it is it's another kind of kicker where you can promise opponent a gift as you cast the spell. If you do, they get that gift before the other effects. So for example, Long River's Pull is blue for an instant, an uncommon, and it counters target creature spell. So it's an essence scatter. But if you gift your opponent a card, it says gift a card, you can instead counter target spell. So if they play a Wrath of God, if they play a big non-creature spell you have to counter, you can give them a card and then you get to counter their spell. And there's lots of cards like that where basically you get either an extra effect or a slightly different effect if you give them the gift. And some of them have low cost gifts like giving your opponent a food. Some of them have giving them a card that's really high cost, and it just ranges, and there's different kind of effects you get from each of them. Overall, gift cards are just, you look at them, and if this card's good enough in on its own, then you'll play it. They're not super synergistic. There are cards, like I think there's like an uncommon that whenever you gift your opponent something, you draw a card. So obviously that pays you off. But most of the time, they're just, is this card good? Would you pay the kicker? Sometimes, yeah.
And it's always a may. You can just choose.
You're never really forced to, except in the case of like Long River's Pull, you might not get to use the card if you don't give a gift. So it's not always a minor thing. Sometimes it can change the card from being on to being off.
Well, what if it's your opponent's birthday?
If it's your opponent's birthday, you have to pay the gift.
Forced to give gifts.
The raccoon mechanic, red-green, is expend, which is when you expend number, 4 is a very common number. So when you spend that much mana on casting spells during a turn, not just your turn, the expend goes off. For example, Roughshod Duos, 2 in red for a 3/2 trample. And it says when you expend 4, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So you cast Roughshod Duo on 3. On turn 4, you can just tap out for a 4-drop and attack with it, and it's already triggered and it's now a 4/3, or you pump something else. You also can do things like on turn 4, cast a 2-drop attack with this, and if you have a 2-mana spell, even if it's not a combat trick itself, the expend will pop off because the expend just looks at the total mana you've spent casting spells. So you can trigger the expend kind of mid-combat if you have an instant. And expend is a nice reward for curving out. It's a good way to kind of get value off casting slightly more expensive cards, and it's kind of just like an aggressive mechanic overall. Threshold is back. Threshold is when you have 7 cards in your graveyard, Threshold is on. So Shoreline Looter is 1 in a blue for a 1/1 unblockable. And when it hits them, you draw a card. And then if you have Threshold, you don't have to discard a card. So it's a looter, draw a card, discard a card, except once you hit Threshold, it just becomes draw a card, which is pretty nice. There's also just creatures that get slightly bigger when you have Threshold, that sort of thing. And Threshold is like the blue-black rats mechanic. You're trying to fill your graveyard. It's good with looting effects. It's good with cantrips. It's good with creatures trading off. It's good with removal spells. And it's good if you kind of drag the game out a little longer because naturally you tend towards getting Threshold. That's kind of just a thing that happens in a game of Magic. Though I will warn you that if you're not trying to get Threshold, you're not going to get there anytime soon. It's 7 cards in your graveyard. It's a lot. You're not getting there. Except, if you're casting cash grabs and other, that's the green squirrel common that mills you for 4. Like, that's a way to get there. But for the most part, Threshold is going to be something you're going to have to work for. Because naturally it will happen, but it will happen slowly. And then Forage is like the squirrel mechanic. So we've got, when you forage, like I mentioned, you exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. So that you can either forage through your graveyard or you can eat a food. And there's cards like Corpseberry Cultivator, which is a 2/3 for 3. And it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, forage. You may forage. And when you forage, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So the thing that you might not think immediately on this triggers whenever you forage. So it works really well with other cards that forage for effects and stuff like that. And the squirrels kind of like filling their graveyard as well. So it's like a little bit of an overlap with Threshold, especially on black cards, that sort of thing. So those are like kind of like the new mechanics or the like name mechanics. In terms of themes, bats are like a life game theme. Rabbits are like offspring and tokens. Squirrels, I mentioned, are forage. Rats are Threshold. Frogs are like creatures leaving the battlefield without dying. So like exiling, blinking, or bouncing, and they have various cards that trigger and give you benefits. Birds are flying, and they work well with non-flying creatures. They have a bunch of cards that want you to mix flyers and not flyers. Like the birds are kind of like the support troops in some ways. Otters are spells. Red-blue is straight up a spells deck once again, which I love. I think that's fun. Mice are valiant. They're valiant little mice. They're like red-white aggro that wants to target its own stuff. Red-green are raccoon. They're like expending. And then red-black lizards, they key off your opponent being dealt damage. So when your opponent is dealt damage, their cards have additional effects or slightly better, kind of like Bloodthirst back in whenever it was introduced many years ago. So that's kind of the mechanics going into the set. There's a lot going on. Some of these mechanics naturally overlap more than others, and they clearly put effort into trying to make it so the ones that like the colors that overlap, so you can have, the black squirrel cards really like some of the black rat Threshold cards, or like the blue otters are pretty happy with getting paired with like blue rats as well, because Threshold is something that the blue decks can easily get to. Mice and raccoons are both aggressive and want to curve out, that sort of thing. So we'll see how this goes as we get into the individual cards, but there's a lot going on here. I really like that this is keyed off of just real world creatures, because just everyone pretty much, at least if they didn't now before, they know now what all these animals look like. And I think these are also pretty well-known animals. So you're going to sit here and you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's definitely a bat. That's an otter. That's a frog. And you can kind of get a sense of how the mechanics go with them, which is a kind of nice handhold. You're not trying to wrap your mind around a new concept, which some of the sets have. This is keying off of like a very real world thing.
Okay. Well, let's get into we'll start with our normal starting point, which would be the signpost uncommons, but they've also got a friend. There's a group of 10 mentor cards, but then there's a hybrid common that kind of goes with them. And so we're just going to go over both at the onset here to see if we can't zero in even further on what each archetype is starting to do. So the first one up will be Plume-Creed Mentor, which is 1 blue-white for a 2/3 flying bird scout at uncommon. And it says, whenever Plume-Creed Mentor or another creature you control with flying enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. As you mentioned, they kind of help out the ground creatures.
I mean, if you can curve a 2-drop into this, you're going to be really far ahead, especially if your next play is another flyer. So I think Plume Creed Mentor is quite good. It's about a B-level card, but you're going to want to mix flyers and non-flyers in a way that will kind of get you what you want. And sometimes this will miss, but also a 3-mana 2/3 flyer is pretty decent stats to begin with. So I just like straight up B for Plume Creed Mentor. It's a strong card.
Looks super solid to me. Next is Seed Pod Squire. So this is 3 in a white or 3 in a blue. It's a hybrid mana symbol. And you get a 3/3 flying bird scout, and it's common. And it says, whenever it attacks, target creature you control without flying gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So both of these have flying and help non-flyers. So we get the theme here.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the weaker hybrids in terms of it doesn't overlap quite as much as some of the other ones. It's a fine card if it's kind of in the uncanny valley of like a little too expensive to be a really reliable aggro card, but not quite big enough to be an actual finisher. So yes, the flying decks will want this. It will be good in like blue-white, but I don't see this being a card I want in like blue-red or blue-black, for example. It's just not that strong. I do like that in white-red, it targets, so you can target your mice and kind of get those Valiant effects.
Bonuses, yeah.
Seed Pod Square looks like a C. If you need it, it's fine. It's just not a card I'm gonna go out of my way to enable or pick up early.
Yeah, it looks like a C, and it's common, so it should be. Next is the blue-black uncommon. It's called Tidecaller Mentor. It's 1 blue-black for a 3/3 rat wizard at uncommon. It's got Menace. So 3 mana 3/3 Menace, and it has Threshold. When it enters, if you have Threshold, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Wow.
Yeah, if early game 3 mana 3/3 Menace is not too bad, and late game having it be bounce is quite good. You do have to do some work to make this, something you want, but I would say the average blue-black deck is going to be just happy with a 3 mana 3/3 rat with Menace or later a bounce spell. So I would give Tidecaller Mentor a B-. I think it'll be good in those decks, but you won't get the bounces quite as often as you might be hoping.
That's right. It is primarily a 3/3 Menace for 3. But when you do get the bounce, that does make it a much more relevant late game play. So I like that too. B- for Tidecaller Mentor. Next is Mind Drill Assailant. This is 2 and a blue-black hybrid, 2 and 2 blue-black hybrid. So you can pay 2 blue-blue, 2 blue-black, or 2 black-black for it. And it's a 2/5 rat warlock at common. And it's got Threshold. It gets +3/+0. So if you have Threshold, it's a 4 mana 5/5. And you can pay 2 and a blue or 2 and a black to Surveil 1, which, as a reminder, is look at the top card of your library, and you can put it in your graveyard if you want. So obviously a fuel there for Threshold and card selection as well.
This card is pretty good at getting you to Threshold or just on a stalled board, which it kind of contributes to. It's a 2/5 a lot of the time, sometimes a 5/5. Just finding more gas in your opponent. This card did not look like the most impressive, but I've played against it a couple times now, and it's been better than it looks. I think this card's it's still probably a C to C+, but it looked a little more like a C- to me. So I would actually give Mind Drill Assailant a C+. I think you're going to feel pretty good about the mana you invested into this, slowing the game down, and then starting to surveil and kind of enable your other cards. So
yeah, I was going to say that
Mind Drill Assailant.
Same. It has a nice, when you play it, the game kind of stops, and then you can spend your mana on your surveil ability. And then when you get it up to 5/5, now you can start closing out the game. Also, that is instant speed, right? So like, if you have 6 mana, 5 cards in your yard, you can just be like, attack with this, and they have to respect it as a potential 5/5.
Yeah, it's got some good stuff going for it.
Okay, what did you want to give it? Like a C?
C+. I think this card's decent. I think you're not going to want a bunch of these, but like having one of these in your blue-black deck sounds great, and maybe even 2.
Yeah, two. It's just 3 mana is a lot to surveil 1, so you really have to be maximizing for it. Next is Fireglass Mentor. This is the red-black version, and that's exactly what it costs, just red-black. It's a 2/1 Lizard Warlock at uncommon. It says at the beginning of your main phase, if an opponent lost...
Second main phase.
Oh, thank you. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Choose one of them until end of turn. You may play that card. Wow.
Really strong card.
That's sweet.
You have to play it before attacks, but if you have the coast clear to attack your opponent, you can play this, immediately dig for a land to play this turn, and maybe or a cheap spell depending on where in the game it is. And then late game, this card is just an excellent way to churn through your deck and find exactly what you need. Like you just need a way to ping them, which red black has plenty of ways to do that. So
and loss of life is combat damage, regular damage, or life loss specifically. So it's just anything. So if you can ping them, if you can use a burn spell, if you can attack them in combat, any of those things, and you have this on the battlefield when your second main phase begins, which means you have to have cast it prior, you're good to go.
Even just casting this on turn 2, if your opponent doesn't have a 2-drop,
you're
just going to attack and draw a card. And if they do, sometimes you'll go like kill your thing, attack, try to hit a land, and Fireglass Mentor just adds up really quickly. I would give this a B+. I think Fireglass Mentor is just an excellent card, a really good start to a draft.
Totally. Wow, that's awesome. The red-black hybrid is called Cindering Cutthroat, and it is 2 and a red-black hybrid for a 3/2 Lizard Assassin at common, and it says it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if an opponent lost life this turn. So there's the theme. And then you can pay 1 and a red or 1 and a black to have it get menace until end of turn.
This card is pretty good.
Very it's also punishing if it's curving out, yeah.
One of the better hybrid cards because it fits fine in like red-green and red-white and, black-white. Like there's a lot of different decks that, of course, black-red that want this. Like I would say that Cinder and Cutthroat's a pretty flexible card. And if you can hit them, 3-mana 4/3 is great, and giving it menace is a great way to make blocks a little more difficult for your opponent in the late game. I like C+ on Cinder and Cutthroat. This has seemed like a kind of a very safe card to take early because you'll play it in such a wide variety of decks.
Okay, yeah, looks solid to me too. And these cards are very much pairing up with each other as well. If you do get your hands on one of these uncommons, I assume that these commons are going to be really nice with them. This next one's called Wandertail Mentor. It's green-red for a 2/2 Raccoon Bard at uncommon, and it says whenever you expend 4, put a +1/+1 counter on Wandertail Mentor. And then this is one of those weird ones. It is a mana creature as well. It taps for either red or green. So 2 mana 2/2 that taps for red or green and then gets bigger in the late game.
Hey, not even the late game. Like, imagine you cast this turn 2. If turn 3 you cast a 4-drop, now you've got your 3/3.
True. That's true.
It's just great. I think Wandertail Mentor is a fantastic card. It's exactly what the red-green deck wants, which is kind of their goal with these cards. And I would say that Wandertail Mentor is a fantastic start to a red-green deck. I would give it a B. It's just very, very good. And even in the late game, if you have things to cast, like this is just going to become a 4/4, maybe a 5/5, which is great on your mana dork, which is what your deck that wants to spend 4 mana is looking for.
Yeah, that card is awesome. Junkblade Bruiser is the common, and it is 3 and 2 red-green hybrid, so 5 mana total for a 4/5 Raccoon Berserker at common. It's got Trample, and whenever you expend 4, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. Is that good?
Yeah. I mean, it's a 6/6 trample if you can tap out or tap a bunch of mana on the next turn. 5 mana for that is a good deal. Like, I don't think this is a spectacular card, but this deck also doesn't mind having cards that let them expend in one shot. So expend having a 5-drop for your expend 4 deck is pretty good. I would say Junkblade Bruiser is a C. Like, you're not gonna be, super stoked to have this card, but it is a good card in your red-green decks.
Yeah, expend 4 feels like it's sort of naturally capped. Like, it's not like I can be like, oh, I'm going to build my deck and just put a ton of 4, 5s, and 6s in it, right? Like, we try not to do that. We try to focus on 2s, 3s, sometimes 1s. Yeah,
I think that expend 4, you want to cluster in the 4 and 5 mana area.
Really?
Like, for... You don't want your high end to be all 6s and more. Like, they're not.
I see. You want to get on the low end of still triggering.
You want to play a couple things and then have 4s and 5s to top it off. So you don't have a ton of slots for this.
Yeah, I guess what my thinking would be is that I don't get to trigger this every turn. Like if I get to trigger it once or maybe twice in a game, that's probably about where it'll land.
Yeah.
What do you want to give the Junkblade Bruiser?
I would give it a C.
Yeah, it seems fine.
It's a fine card.
Next is Beauregard Mentor. It's green-white for a star rabbit soldier at uncommon with trample. And his power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control.
So it's a base 1/1. Counts itself.
Uh-huh.
and
then
obviously
they multiply like rabbits.
They do. All the rabbit tokens can make this into a 4/4, 5/5, 7/7, whatever. I like this card. You do have to be doing the thing pretty heavily. Like you only need to have 3 creatures in play, 2 other creatures for you to feel okay about this.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, if you're talking about should I use my first pick on this card, I think this is probably like C plus B minus level, more than the like rock solid, Wandertail, Fireglass Mentor area.
Right. Yeah, this one definitely has a slightly more build around nature to it, but it is very easy to build around. The next card is Head of the Homestead. This is 3 and 2 green-white hybrid. So again, 5 mana total. This is a 3/2 Rabbit Citizen at common. And it says when Head of the Homestead enters, create 2 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens.
Yeah, 5 mana for a 3/2 plus 2 1/1s.
And it just happens, right? There's no
goes wide. You're getting good value. Like Junkblade Bruiser, you don't want a ton of 5s in your deck, but Head of the Homestead is a fine place to kind of end your curve in a rabbit deck. This is not one of the hybrid cards that I think goes everywhere. Like I don't think that like a lot of the other decks are going to want this outside of green white, though you will play it sometimes. I would give it Head of the Homestead a C.
Yeah, it looks like a solid one. Very solid card, and again goes really well with the Beauregard Mentor. Next is Moonrise Cleric. This one's actually reversed order from the Mentor. But so this is the common. It is 1 and 2 black-white hybrid, 3 mana total for a 2/3 flying bat cleric at common, and whenever it attacks, you gain a life.
This enables the black-white deck quite well, and it's decent stats. It's really easy to cast in black-white.
What does black-white care about again? Is it just life gain?
Life gain.
Okay.
Yeah, straight up when you gain life. So this is exactly what you want. This is a C, up to a C plus in like a heavy bat deck, but you could just take this early and it's going to be a kind of solid role filler. It's also not the worst in some like a blue-white flyers deck. This can give you another flyer to attack with, though that deck wants non-flyers specifically. It's okay in like black-red sometimes to get this is an easy way to get damage in. So this is another one that the hybrids that doesn't go everywhere, but I think is a solid card. It's a C, Moonrise Cleric.
Looks like a nice thread the needle C. The Starseer Mentor is the uncommon, and it's 3 black-white for a 3/5 Bat Warlock with Flying and Vigilance. So 5 mana, 3/5 Flying Vigilance. And it says, at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card.
So that's a text that you're going to see a fair amount of. They lose life unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. There's just a couple of cards. There's like a rare snake that does that as well. Just to keep that in mind. As for this card, 5 mana, 3/5 Flying Vigilance kind of rules the roost. Like this is going to be a really good card on the board. And then every now and then the ability is going to trigger. If you're good at doing that, great. If you're not and you're black-white, you're still going to play this card. Like it's a solid card either way. I would give B for Starseer Mentor.
Yeah, it looks really good. And it is kind of difficult to lose or gain life on your turn, right?
You have to be trying.
Like, something has to happen.
You have to put the bats have plenty of ways, like that 2/3 and all that. Unfortunately, it only cares if you do it once. It's binary, so you're not getting to like stack up a bunch of these triggers. But it's still nice. You don't need much more on your 5 mana, 3/5 Flying Vigilance.
Totally. So B for Starseer Mentor. Next is Stormcatch Mentor. This is the blue-red Mentor. It's a 1/1 Otter Wizard, and it costs blue-red exactly. It has haste and prowess, and it says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast.
Yeah, this is kind of what the blue-red deck wants. I've generally been skeptical of your spells cost less text. It doesn't usually do that much for you.
No.
But a 2 mana 1/1 prowess with that text and with haste for good measure, I think that you would play that in the deck. Like it's still a decent card. If you cast that, they're going to try to kill it, and you're going to be happy with it in play. Like
I don't know. I'm skeptical of this one. This one feels more constructed-y to me. Like
definitely is more that. Yes.
These ones tend to make very poor top decks. We kind of always imagine them coming down on turn 2, hitting for 1, and then untap and play a couple of spells. And that's a pretty exciting opener for sure. But I just find that they fall off very quickly after that. And if you don't have it down on turn 2, then it loses a lot of luster too.
Yeah, I would say Stormcatch Mentor is a C+.
Okay.
And you'll play it in the blue-red deck, but it's not, I see this card third pick, I want to go into that deck.
Okay. I'm going to go C- on the Mentor. There's definitely some power here, but I'm skeptical. Next is Tempest Angler, which is 1 and 2 blue-red hybrid, so 3 mana for a 2/2 Otter Wizard at common. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it. That's nice. See, I like that.
Yeah, this one's good, for sure.
I mean, this is the type of thing that you can play for 3, and, if you do get to do that thing I mentioned where you cast a couple of spells, they stick around. You got yourself a 4/4, and then, it'll grow a little bit further down the line at some point. That's solid. Anytime you get to keep the counters, I'm much, much more interested than prowess, which feels very much like a glass cannon in limited most of the time.
Yeah, I like C+ for Tempest Angler.
Me too.
I think that you're going to be incentivized to go into this deck when you open it.
Vine Reap Mentor is the black-green one. It's a 3/2 Squirrel Druid at uncommon, and it says when it enters or dies, create a food token.
I like Vine Reap Mentor a lot. It's enabling all of your forage stuff really effectively, because you get 2 food out of this, and a 2 mana 3/2 is going to trade, it's going to trade off soon. You're going to get that second food, and it's just good stats, and it's good to bring back, like Vine Reap Mentor. There's a bunch of ways to bring back creatures from your graveyard in this color pair. So I like B for Vine Reap Mentor. This card is exactly what I want. This is the opposite of the blue-red one. This always works at every point in the game and becomes even better when you're doing the thing, which both share, but the low end on this is huge compared to some of the other cards. So I like B for Vine Reap Mentor, which brings us to Corpseberry Cultivator. This is the one I mentioned in the example. It's 1 and 2 black-green hybrid mana. So 3 mana total for a 2/3 Squirrel Warlock at common. Beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage. And once again, that's exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sack of food. And whenever you forage, you put a +1/+1 counter on this. So 2 of them works out incredibly well. One of them forages, both get a counter. Then the other forage, and they both get a counter again. So it stacks really well. This is Corpseberry Cultivator. It's like the perfect kind of card. It works on its own, but it enables all your other forage cards effectively well and leeches off them when they forage. So I would honestly say like B- for Corpseberry Cultivator. Like if you're in this deck, this is exactly what you want. And it's hybrid, so it's going to be really easy to cast in green-black. You also could play this in like a blue-black Threshold deck because you're filling your graveyard, and this is a payoff for that, though obviously it takes you off of Threshold as well.
Okay, yeah, that card looks very, very strong for a common. Next is Seedglaive Mentor. This is 1 red-white for a 3/2 Mouse Soldier at uncommon. It's got Vigilance and Haste and Valiant whenever it becomes target of a spell or ability you control the first time each turn. You put a +1/+1 counter on it. Nice. Wow.
Yeah.
Dang, that thing slams.
It's just a great payoff, for any of the Valiant stuff. Like, it comes in, it attacks. It's almost always just like a 4/3 immediately. Seedglaive Mentor is great. It's a B.
Yeah, that looks awesome. Veteran Guard Mouse is the common. It's 3 and a red or 3 and a white. You can choose. It's a 3/4 Mouse Soldier at common, and it has whenever it has Valiant. Whenever it comes, blah blah blah. It gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, and you scry 1.
Yeah, this one's okay.
That's
At 4 mana, it's actually on the pricey side for this color combo, and the payoff isn't like amazing. I would actually give Veteran Guard Mouse like a C. It just is a card you can play in these decks, but it's not a card you're going to prioritize.
Yeah, it looks like a C to me. Last color pair is green-blue. Our first card is the common. It's Pond Prophet, and this is 2 green-blue hybrid, so 2 mana total in any combination of green and blue mana for a 1/1 Frog Advisor at common. And when it enters, you draw a card. Oh, hello, my little froggy friend. Oh, man, 2 mana?
It's so good, too, because like all the Frog deck wants to do is blink and bounce all their own stuff. And Pond Prophet's just sitting there leeching, just like drinking all that delicious pond water and drawing you a bunch of cards while being a good spot on your curve. And in blue-green, it's you can never get mana screwed when casting this. So I love Pond Prophet. You're probably not surprised to learn I had a lot of them in my decks yesterday.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think the card's like a B-. Like, it's so powerful in enabling that deck. I kind of see Pawn Profit a little way like I see Corpseberry Cultivator, which is when you're in that deck, the blue greens here, blue green black there. We're not talking about the hybrid stuff. When you're in that specific deck, these cards make all your other cards better.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have a high premium on cards that do that. Like they both work by themselves just fine. You're not losing out when you're casting them, but they also make everything else better. So I think Pawn Profit's critical, and the Frog decks are going to love having it.
Totally. And this one has a very high floor also, which is great. So you want to get into the B range for Pawn Profit?
I would say B minus, honestly.
Yeah,
I think that's about where you're gonna want to be taking it.
Lily Splash Mentor is the blue-green mentor. It's 2 blue-green for a 4/4 Frog Druid with Reach. It's uncommon. And it has activated ability. You can pay 1 blue-green to exile another target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. There is a catch. It's only sorcery speed.
Yeah,
but still, look at that 1/2 punch we just showed you right here.
I mean, the catch is that this card isn't the most obnoxious card in the world. It's just pretty obnoxious.
Right.
Lily Splash Mentor is great. 4 mana, 4/4 Reach is already pretty good at defending yourself. And then it has this really powerful activated ability that the floor on it is like give a creature a +1/+1 counter, but really it's like closer to you. Whenever you activate this, you're coming close to drawing a card. You're either literally drawing a card off Pawn Profit, or you're like blinking a tapper, or you're blinking like, a creature that has this other effect, and all of it kind of adds up to that. I would give Lily Splash Mentor a B. Like, it's just going to be a big threat. The fact that you're not paying too much of a cost, that you're getting good stats out of the deal, is what really sells me on it. Yeah. You can have a fast game against red-white where you cast this on 4 and never activate it, and it's still a good card. It's not a 4 mana 2/2 that you have to be getting value out of the activated ability.
Yeah, I would go B+ on it. The Reach really seals it for me. I mean, that is a very beefy defender that gives you the time you need to start activating it. It's basically a must kill because they can't attack through it, in the earlier part of the game. And with that activated ability, even just putting a counter on some of your creatures is already going to be good enough, let alone the gross stuff that you can do with it. Wow, I like that. And, I'm guarding myself a little bit, but blue-green looks the coolest, as it often does. And, maybe that pushed common will get it over the hump and make it actually really good this time instead of just getting ran over by red-white or whatever.
Oh, there is that risk still.
Yeah.
I drafted blue-green yesterday, had a bunch of splash portals and profits, and was drawing all these cards, and sometimes they just have this like curve out draw that all the 2 mana 1/1 draw cards in the world aren't going to be good against that.
Yeah.
So you gotta watch out for that.
Okay, we're going to start with blue as we kind of rotate through the colors as we go. And our first blue card is called Into the Floodmaw. It is blue for an instant. It's uncommon. It says, this is great text. This is rules text, by the way. Gift a tapped fish. So this is the gift mechanic that we talked about, but in this case, a fish is a 1/1 blue fish creature token that is tapped, as I mentioned. So it says, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If the gift was promised, instead return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand.
So most of the time you are going to cast this as blue bounce a creature, and so it does that pretty effectively. I think that blue bounce a creature an opponent controls is okay.
Yeah.
The fact that it's only opponent controls actually is a pretty big drawback, because a lot of the strength of bounce, like I would say, I don't know, maybe like 25% of the uses on 1 blue bounce target creature is on your own creatures. So losing that functionality is big. Getting the functionality of bouncing a non-land permanent instead, that's okay. It's also just fine. Like giving them a fish is a cost, but bouncing a Banishing Light at a key time can be really devastating. So I would say that you're probably going to play this more often than not, like in blue-red spells and blue-black threshold and frog deck, because these are decks that like the spells decks wants any spell. The threshold deck wants things to go to the graveyard, which this does. The blue-green deck can draw a lot of cards, but when you're behind on board, you need cards like this to kind of catch up. So my guess is this is a C and gets played a fair amount. It's not great, but it does kind of what you want.
That's what I think too. You have to the deck has to really, really want to either cast spells or affect the board for cheap, but not permanently. Next is Shore Up. This is blue for an instant. It's common. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Tap it. This is a reprint, right?
Yep. Shore Up was in Dominaria United.
Okay.
Remember the little lobster?
The lobster guy, yeah.
Yeah, this card's good. It's a solid way to beat a removal spell, to win in some combats, to do some ambushing. You're not always going to have spots for this in these decks. Like the Frog deck, I don't think is a chomping at the bit to play it. But protecting your important otter in your spells deck that doesn't have that many creatures, like that this can be really good. It trades up for a lot of mana.
I mean, I'll say the existence of Shore Up in this deck makes me like the blue-red card that I was like kind of down on a lot more. Like, this is the type of card that can actually make a prowess deck work because, as I mentioned, it can be kind of a glass cannon. This lets you be a little bit patient and then give you the ability to protect your key creature at a key time, and that can be the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, I would give Shore Up a C, but it could be very good when you want it.
I agree.
I love the next one, though.
Yeah, what's the next one?
Splash Portal is blue for a sorcery, so it is a sorcery. Okay. At uncommon, exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If that creature is a bird, frog, otter, or rat, draw a card.
So those are the blue
creature types. Mm-hmm. And really where this wants to go most is in the frog deck, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, even with just like the Portal Prophet, it's blue for draw 2 cards, right? Like, that's great. And we're going to see more payoffs for your creatures leaving the battlefield without dying as we go on. Splash Portal, if you're in blue-green, this card's like close to a B, assuming you're a good blue-green deck. If you're not, well, this card might just be straight up unplayable, depends on what you're doing. But one of the things I like about how this set is constructed, and we'll see how it plays out, is I look at this card and I'm like, well, the blue-green deck loves it. Mm-hmm. The blue-red deck doesn't actually mind cheap spells that cantrip, especially if you've got a couple otters in here, to make sure it's always drawing that card. In the blue-black deck, a cantrip on your rat that goes to the graveyard and gets threshold, that's also pretty good. It's not great in the blue-white deck. I would imagine that deck's going to be a little more aggressive. But 3 of the blue decks being into like spells and filling your graveyard and fiddling around with fiddly stuff, like that means that there's cards that can go in all those decks, and we're going to see a lot of cool crossovers and overlaps. So I like the existence of Splash Portal a lot. I would probably give it like a C+ overall grade, and just know that in blue-green it's going to be fantastic.
Okay, yeah, it has some build-around undertones for sure. Bellowwing Crier is next. It's 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Frog Advisor at common, and it says when it enters, draw a card, then discard a card. So this is a mediocre payoff in the way that we were talking about the hybrid guy. Yeah.
Yeah, like this is what you play when you don't get enough of the hybrid card. Like This is Pawn Portal or Pawn Prophet. This is just a fine card. I think Bellowing Crier is good enough to put in your deck, but is not a card that I'm going to be like hoping to take in the first 3 or 4 picks. But it's totally a playable card. It's a filler card. It does get you the threshold as well. I wouldn't really want to play this in the blue-red deck, though. That's a different part of it. So
is this a green light for me to keep a sketchy 2-lander that I can cast this on turn 2?
Yeah, definitely.
Sweet, I'm in. So C for Bellowing Crier.
Just C. Yeah. It's a good card, but you're not gonna be prioritizing this, but you're definitely gonna put it in your deck.
Dazzling Denial is next. It is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. It says counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. If you control a bird, same thing except for they have to pay 4 instead.
This card is fantastic in the birds deck. Like the 2-mana counter unless you pay 2 spell has been just always solid over the last bunch of times we've seen
decent, yeah.
And at the end of it, getting an additional 2 out of it in a bird deck means even in the mid game, this is countering things very nicely. So I would say Dazzling Denial is a C and up to a C+ in birds. But I think your frog deck will still be okay with playing this card just to not get completely run over early.
Yeah, I agree. The floor on this seems totally fine and the ceiling's really nice. Basically a hard counter. Next is Gossip's Talent. This is 1 and a blue for an enchantment class, and it is uncommon. And it says, if you remember, gain the next level as a sorcery to add its ability. So baseline, it says whenever a creature you control enters, surveil 1, but you can pay 1 and a blue to get it to level 2, where it says whenever you attack, target attacking creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn, and you maintain the ETB thing too. And then you can level it up from there for 3 and a blue more mana to level 3, which is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may exile it, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Is there a sweet spot for Gossip's talent?
I don't think so. I think that the place where this fits the most naturally is the frog deck, because the third level will trigger all your like leaves the battlefield, without dying things. But I saw people cast this against me, and I was not impressed. Like,
yeah, I
just can't imagine spending 2 to cast this, and whenever a creature you control enters Surveil 1 is just not a great card. You would not spend a card on that.
Right.
And then you level it up again, and you're like, okay, one of your small creatures is unblockable. Okay, I spent 4 mana so far. And then you spend 4 more mana to start doing the exile thing. Yes, I can imagine a game where if you can stall out the board, this card just dominates, right? It lets you surveil 4 times, and then your Pawn Prophet just keeps attacking unblockable, and you exile it, and you're drawing an extra card every turn. But I can also imagine you playing against red, white, or red, black, or red, green, any of the red decks, and you have this card in your opening hand, you never cast it the entire game. So
this card seems to really excel at parity.
Like a D to me.
Yeah, it seems to excel at parity, which is a weird card. That's very rare that's the case, but it's kind of bad in every other quadrant. So yeah, I like D for Gossip's talents as well. Next is Long River's Pull. This is blue for an instant. It's uncommon, and it says gift a card. And if you do, it says counter target spell if the gift was promised. Instead, counter target creature spell if the gift was promised. Counter target spell.
If your mana base can support blue, then I would probably play this card. A lot of mana bases can't. And when you miss the boat on this, like when you don't have it up on a critical turn, it gets so much worse. Like you didn't counter their good 4 mana uncommon, and now it's like I can never leave the mana up for this. Like I think that this card is not a card I'm going to play that often, just because double blue early is such a big ask. It is nice to have a safety blanket later. You can always counter anything, and that giving them a card when the game's about to conclude, like, is fine. Like they cast their 6 mana spell, and you're just like, boom. They cast one of the seasons, right? That's that like cycle of mythic rares that have all these big effects. You counter it, they draw a card, you attack and kill them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, countering a creature spell is kind of the sweet spot, but usually we get that for cheaper or easier to cast than this, and this kind of tries to split the difference, and giving somebody a card in the middle of the game to counter their removal spells not a winning formula, generally speaking. So for limited, Long River's Pull looks a little sketchy to me. I would give it a D. I would assume we're not going to be playing this that often. Heavy blue, sure, you could sneak one in there, but
yeah. I think D is right for Long River's Pull.
Otterball Antics is next. It's 1 and a blue for a sorcery at uncommon. It says create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. If this spell was cast from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And they do equip you for such things. You can flash this back for 3 and a blue, which means you can cast it from your graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it.
So this 2 mana 1/1 prowess, and then 4 mana 2/2 prowess, all in the same card.
And they trigger prowess?
Yep. Oh, they trigger prowess. You can discard or mill the Otterball Antics for value. Like,
man, this is all in the context of that deck being a thing that works, but that's awesome. Like, Otterball Antics is definitely the type of card that could make that type of deck work.
I mean, I look at these cards and I'm thinking, well, if the blue-red deck is good, this is going to be like a B in that deck. It just is great. And the flashback really makes me want it in the rat deck as well, because that deck likes looting and likes self-mill, and just getting free cards out of that, I mean, sounds pretty good.
It does to me too. Yeah, this is narrow again, but that's just how that deck plays out. This is a card that can really pump it up. This covers a lot of bases. I would call it build around B for Otterball Antics, though with the concession that you said where, a self-mill deck or a surveil deck or something could also take advantage of it.
Yeah. I like Otterball Antics. It looks fun. Cool name too.
Yeah, it is. Plume Creed Escort is next. It's 1 and a blue for a 2/1 bird scout at uncommon. It's got flash and flying, and when it enters, target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Ooh, that's annoying.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking, like, they have really been bumping the power level of the cheap flyers. It feels like they just keep giving us more and more in our 2 mana flyers. This is 2 mana 2/1 flying used to have a drawback, like can't block non-flyers.
Right
now it's like you got flash and you give a creature hexproof until end of turn. Like, I mean, Plume Creed Escort is good, but like I have cut this in a frog deck. You just don't want that kind of card. Whereas like obviously in the blue-white deck, it's fantastic. I think it would be good in kind of like the blue-red decks or blue-black decks that are keeping mana up. If they have instants, this is a good card. But obviously it will be at its best in like the more assertive blue-white style decks. It's a good card. I mean, this is probably like a C+.
Yeah.
I would say C+, B-. I just think its frailty on defense makes it a C+ because just not every deck is going to want it.
That's right. And I think that a lot of times you're going to find that just simply casting it on turn 2 and starting to smash with it is where you want to be. But yeah, I like B for Plume Create Escort. That has a lot going on for only 2 mana. Next is Runaway Together. This is the 1 and a blue instant at common. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. So how do you break the symmetry on this? Because you do have to return one of yours.
The best place for this is in blue-green because it'll trigger your leaves the battlefield without dying stuff. So bouncing one of your cheap frogs that maybe has already drawn you a card and triggers your other card while bouncing their big creature is good. ETBs obviously are always great with this. You also can utilize this well if you've got a lot of ways to draw extra cards. So spending mana on a bounce spell is pretty good. But the main thing is just having good creatures of your own that you want to bounce, that you're looking to bounce.
Hopefully cheap ones. Yeah, Pawn Prophet seems like the best. You know, you could do the old, they attack with a bunch of stuff, you block with your Pawn Prophet, you bounce
one of their other things.
Right.
I think overall this card's going to be like a C to a C+ in blue-green and kind of like a D.
Yeah.
Most other
That's
decks.
what I would assume too. And you probably want 1 at most.
Yeah.
Next is Shoreline Looter. This is one used as an example. Great card, though. It's 1 and a blue for a 1/1. Yeah, Bat Rogue. It's uncommon and it can't be blocked. So you just get a straight up 1/1 unblockable. And then it says Threshold. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then discard a card unless you have Threshold, which is 7 or more in your graveyard.
Which it gets you 2 Threshold very quickly. It's also 2 mana, 1 unblockable, draw a card every turn. Like it's a looter, but like you see so many cards.
Totally.
I would play this in any blue deck. This is just a great card. Yeah, it does get better when you're kind of playing to the Threshold deck or what have you. But I think that you would just be happy with this in every deck. So I like B for Shoreline Looter. It's just a really good card.
B for the looter. Next is Thought Shucker. Easy. 1 and a blue.
What was that?
1 and a blue for a 1/3 Rat Rogue at common.
How many thoughts will a Thought Shucker shuck if a Thought Shucker could shuck minds?
Wow, you're braver than I am. This one has Threshold. 1 and a blue. Put a +1/+1 counter on Thought Shucker and draw a card. Activate only if you have Threshold and only once.
So,
once ever?
Once ever, yeah. The payoff here is not very big. Like you would not put this in a deck that was like medium at getting Threshold, but once you're like really far down that road, you want this card. And I love that there are cards like this in the set. Like that is one of the higher predictors of me liking a draft format is like a card like Thought Shucker, which you're just, well, I'm never going to play this in blue-white. You know, this is not the card I'm looking for, even in a lot of like my blue-green decks. Whereas like blue-black or maybe blue-red, yeah, they're happy to pick this up late and really have this be a powerful card in their arsenal. So, I mean, Thought Shucker is like a D in most decks and like a C to maybe even C+ in a rat deck that's really good at getting Threshold. So I like cards like that. They end up in the right people's hands. You know,
that's true.
You end up with this in the deck that wants it more at a pretty high rate.
Next is Finch Formation. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Bird Scout at common. It has Offspring 3, which again, as a reminder, you can pay the extra 3 and then you get the 1/1 copy of it. It's got flying and it says when this creature enters, target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. So you can pay 6 to get a 2/2 and a 1/1 and jump 2 creatures at the same time, or
I mean, this card can end games pretty nicely. Imagine this doing a bunch of damage and then leaving something behind, or you just play it on turn 3 and you just have your cheap flyer. So I think Finch Formation is okay. It's not amazing, but it's got a powerful effect in the late game. It's okay to cast early. Probably like a C- level card.
Yeah, they priced this one conservatively with the Offspring, which is appropriate. Next is Long River Lurker. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 Frog Scout at uncommon. It has Ward 1, and it says other frogs you control have Ward 1. And it says when Long River Lurker enters, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever that creature deals combat damage this turn, you may exile it. If you do, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control.
Card's great. I mean, giving all your frogs Ward 1 is already pretty good because that's really annoying for your opponent. It's not going to like necessarily stop them from killing your creatures, but maybe they can only play 1 spell instead of 2 spells this turn. Maybe they have to wait an extra turn to cast their expensive removal. Like that's all well and good. And then the ability means you're immediately getting damage in and re-triggering an ICTB. I mean, turn 2 Profit. You can see how important this card is now that we've talked about Pawn Profit in the context of every blue card, basically.
Yeah, we have.
That is how you can tell it's just a key common. Like you have to have this card. Turn 2 Profit into turn 3 Long River Lurker. You just get to draw an additional card right then. Like
that's awesome.
It's just great. I think Long River Lurker is a B in the Frog deck, and out of the side of the Frog deck, a little less good, of course.
Okay. Yeah. Look, it does. The other frogs you control have Ward 1 has a little bit of a build around vibe. Next is Mind Whisker. This is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 Rat Wizard at uncommon. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1, and it has threshold as long as 7 or more cards are in your graveyard. Creatures your opponents control get -1, -0.
That last line of text is really hard to beat.
Extremely annoying.
It doesn't come early, but this surveils 1, so it's getting you there by itself. And in the right deck, like, 2 mana, 2/1 looter, turn 3 this, surveil, cast another spell or 2. You just have threshold on turn 5 or 6 pretty easily.
If you're aggressive about it, yeah.
And then giving all their creatures -1, -0 is great. Surveilling every turn is great. Mind Whisker is like a B- in the threshold deck and probably like a C+ everywhere else.
And by the way, it's no mistake that they made this 2 toughness. Like these type of cards are so annoying. They have typically come on like artifacts or enchantments before where they're difficult to get rid of, and they really do change the game a lot. This one they made more fragile. Next is Night Whirl Hermit. This is 2 and a blue for a 1/4 Rat Rogue at common. It's got Vigilance, and it says Threshold. It gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. I'm not really excited about that one.
Well, so this is one where I think getting to play with the set really helped because I would have also said initially that this card looked pretty medium, and I've had it be seen it be actually good multiple times against me, where they just get to threshold without too much, trouble. And if the game stalls out, just 2 a turn, 2 a turn, 2 a turn. Like it actually does do the thing. So
right.
I think Night Whirl Hermit is a C in the threshold deck and like a D outside of it or an F outside of it. But it is a solid C in that deck. Like you do want this card. This is one of the cards you want in your deck. It's a rat and it cares about threshold and it gives you a meaningful payoff for getting there.
And the toughness is good enough to keep you alive long enough to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I believe you. Next is Pearl of Wisdom, which is 2 and a blue for a sorcery at common. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast if you control an otter. And it says draw 2 cards.
Another card that's
they're trying to tempt you.
A C in the deck where you've enabled it, and like a D elsewise. Like I can't really imagine a frog deck, for example, or a bird deck really having the time to just cast divination. But an otter deck that's casting this for 2 mana some of the time, sometimes 1 mana. Imagine you have the prowess red-blue otter out. You're just casting this for 1 mana. Like you could really get there. And I think Pearl of Wisdom's a card you'll play in those decks, but you probably won't play much outside of them.
And you want 1 copy or something like that.
I could see wanting multiple copies.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so. If you're doing the full otter thing, then you get to do it. What would you give it?
I would give it a C. And I would say that C is conditional on it being in the blue-red otter deck. Okay. Maybe a blue-black threshold deck if it's good enough at stalling the board.
Okay. Next is Sugar Coat. This is 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It has Flash, and it says enchant creature or food. And it says enchanted permanent is a colorless food artifact with 2 tap, sacrifice this artifact. You gain 3 life, so food stuff, and loses all other card types and abilities.
I mean, this is a removal spell. Like,
is the food thing just to get around a targeting restriction or whatever?
when it says enchant food, yes, it's that way, so it doesn't
It
fall
doesn't
off
fall
when,
off of itself.
when it
Okay.
turns into a food.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so it turns something into a food at instant speed.
Yeah, but that I think is a solid removal spell.
That's very good, right? I mean, at the very least, it takes it out of combat, even if they do get rid of Sugarcoat.
And then
later.
getting to sack it to game 3 later is just not that
Like,
big of a
who
deal.
cares? Yeah.
Turns off all their abilities. So I would say Sugarcoat's like a B-. It's just a pretty solid removal spell.
Yeah.
Blue doesn't usually get great removal.
Yeah, 3 mana, instant speed really does kind of take care of business. I like that. Next is Waterspout Warden. This is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 Frog Soldier at common. And it says, whenever Waterspout Warden attacks, if another creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, Waterspout Warden gains flying until end of turn.
It's funny, despite this being a frog card, I kind of think this is actually a blue-white bird card.
Yeah, it does
Because
look like it.
It's a non-flyer that picks up all the non-flying buffs that the birds give, and then gets flying and attacks. So you still have a unified front of all flying attackers. So I think it actually works out pretty nicely in those decks. And I don't think the frog deck cares about a 3/2 attacking flyer. Like, that's just not what the decks want. So I would say this is a blue-white card, and it's probably like a C- level blue-white card. But yeah, it could be threatening.
Okay. Okay, next card is Dire Downdraft. 3 and a blue for an instant at common. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast if it targets an attacking or tapped creature. So it can actually hit vigilance creatures that are attacking. Okay, I'm like, what is the use case here? And it says target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library.
Thank you, dog.
Is Julie helping us out with the set review?
Yeah, she decided now is the perfect time to scratch her collar.
Yeah.
Do a little stretch.
They know.
In any case, Dire Downdraft is 3 mana instant speed to bounce onto the top or bottom is pretty good deal. Like,
that
Blue
is a good deal.
Is again happy with that. Sometimes you'll cast on 4, but honestly, it's really easy to cast this for 3 mana. You're not really going to do it. You're not really going to run into a spot where you have to cast it for 4, and it's a really big problem to do so. Sometimes you'll cast it for 4 to remove a blocker. You'll be totally fine with that too. So
yeah,
I like Dire Downdraft. I think it fits actually in all the blue decks. So I think it's like a C, and you could even bump it to C+ if you're really missing removal or something along those lines.
Are tokens enough of a thing to make this even a little better in the set, do you think?
Yeah, the Offspring tokens are all kind of small because they're, 1/1 copies. So you're not, I don't think, going to be Dire Downdrafting a 1/1 and thinking like, oh, wow, that was awesome.
Did it? Okay.
It is nice that you could do that, yes.
Okay.
It doesn't make it worse, I don't think.
Yeah, there you go. Next is Lightshell Duo. This is 3 and a blue for a 3/4 Rat Otter at common. It's got prowess, and it says when Lightshell Duo enters, surveil 2.
So this is our first duo. I wanted to talk about those since I realized I didn't put them in the intro, but the duos are all double-typed creatures. So this is a rat and an otter. And one of the cool things about duos, and I think they actually pulled this off pretty well, like I'm impressed by it, is the duos do a pretty good job of being good in both the decks of those types. So look at Lightshell Duo. 3/4 prowess. So the prowess part is like, okay, when blue-red spells, you could use this. Surveil 2 is obviously good in both decks, but that's the threshold ability, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm going to fill up my graveyard for threshold. So the idea is you would end up with a card that you would be happy to play in a rat deck or an otter deck in blue-red or blue-black. And I think Lightshell Duo is actually one of the weaker duos, but it is a playable card in either of those decks. It's about a C- level card, I'd say.
Okay. Would you be thinking about Surveil as like mill, but with the option to keep, but like you're going to want to be milling a lot because of threshold? Oh,
in this set, a lot of times when you Surveil, you're hoping to see 2 bad cards that you can put in your graveyard.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, obviously, you would rather ultimately find a good card if you really need one. But like, if you could imagine the ordering, if you have 3 cards, you would rather it be bad, bad, good, so that you can get the full threshold value and still draw your good card if that's possible.
I'm just picturing myself sort of assuming that I'm going to put these in the graveyard unless there's something very compelling to convince me otherwise. Next is Spellgyre. I don't know what it is. 2 blue for an instant and uncommon. It says choose one, counter target spell, or surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. Wow.
So my main problem with the spell gyre is it's inefficient at both costs. Or so counter target spell for 4 mana is not great. Surveil 2, draw 2 is not great. The upside of this is that you end up getting to do both. You leave up your mana and you can do both.
What would you say the correct cost for surveil 2, draw 2 cards as an instant would be? Like it's not 2 and a blue, right? That's like 2 good?
Yeah, that probably 1 blue.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't miss too far on that. The counter spell is way off. Yeah.
I mean, again, the upside is on turn 4, you can pass. And if they play something worse than a draw 2, you get to cast a draw 2. And if they play something really good, you get to counter it.
Right.
The downside is I just don't really like spending 4 mana on this effect in either case.
I see. I mean, but surveil 2, draw 2 is like a real setup. I mean, it turbo thresholds you or, finds you kind of what you need. I mean, you could get 4 cards deep into your library. You're going to find something.
Where I think Spellgyre fits the best is the blue-black deck.
Okay.
Or sometimes the blue-red deck.
Uh-huh.
And it gets better if you have other instants too, where you can leave up the mana. Though a lot of the strength of this card is that you just get to cast it. You get to leave up the mana and it covers all your bases.
Right. I agree with you. I think it misses a little bit on both.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel.
Man, but I think I would have a hard time not playing the first Spellgyre and just even if I'm kind of just planning on having it be a surveil 2, draw 2 in the late game or whatever.
I think that if you get to the end of a draft and you don't have a good way to draw cards, this is a pretty decent way to check that box without costing yourself too much. I just think you're going to be really unhappy if you cast it for 4 mana and counter a spell, and you're just like, wow, that was my whole turn.
That was my whole turn. Yeah, that doesn't sound good. C?
I think you could probably give it a C. Yeah.
I mean, there's some
there's
power
some decks
there.
that will want this. I think a lot of them are not going to.
Yeah, I agree. Splash Lasher is next. It's 3 and a blue for a 3/3 frog wizard at uncommon. It's got offspring for 1 and a blue, and it says when this creature enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. Wow. So for 6 mana, you get a 3/3, a 1/1, and 2 stunned creatures on the other side.
Yeah, this card's great. Splash Slasher is fantastic in any deck. Like this is a B. You'd put it in any deck. It's obviously great in a frog deck that can blink it or what have you, but it's just good in any deck. 4 mana, 3/3, lock down a creature for a turn is going to buy you a lot of time.
Yeah.
I think that casting it for 6 mana is often going to, if not end the game, get to the game to a really favorable position. And one of the tricks I've actually learned with this card as I've played it more is you get to double tap the same creature and put 2 stun counters on it.
Oh, really?
So imagine they have out a 5/5 and a 1/1. You just tap the 5/5 twice, and then it doesn't untap for 2 turns.
Right, because the tap gets burned, but the stun counter counts. Wow.
Yeah, so that's a nice little thing you can do with Splash Slasher. It's
Very
great
cool.
if you have Raised Deads. It's just a really good card.
Yeah, B for Splash Slasher. Next is Night Fisher. This is 3 blue for a 4/5 bird knight at uncommon. It's got flying. And it says whenever another non-token bird you control enters, create a 1/1 blue fish creature token.
Most of what you get here is just a 5 mana 4/5 flyer because that's just good stats. And getting a 1/1 fish, it's not a flyer, it's a fish. Getting a 1/1 fish is not, not the most exciting thing in the world. It's a nice little bit of value. It's a good way for you to go like Night Fisher next turn, play a bird, get a chump blocker. Next turn, play a bird, get a chump blocker. But mostly you're just like, all right, well, I would play a 5 mana 4/5 flyer in my deck. Right. So I haven't had this in blue-white yet. I had it in a blue-black deck where it ended up not having enough other birds to really trigger it, and it was still fine.
Okay.
Whereas like in blue-white, I imagined it would be actively great.
And you get to make flying fish if you do the uncommon on it or whatever. It's kind of fun.
Sure.
It is, we've seen that blue-white is birds and cares about flying and not flyers. Would you consider it a traditional blue-white flyers deck from what you've seen from your drafts?
Yeah, that's actually the one archetype I haven't played with or against,
Okay.
or one of the archetypes.
Okay.
I guess there's probably others overall, but I really don't know.
Okay,
I
because
imagine
this
it'll
would
play
be
a
good
lot.
in that archetype.
Yeah, I imagine it'll play a lot like a blue-white flyer deck, and then every now and then it'll have a couple of the non-flyers to pick up those buffs, but you don't have to go out of your way for that.
Okay, yeah, this card would be solid in that deck then. We're pretty picky about our 5 mana cards, but this fills that role just fine. You just need to buy yourself some time on the ground while your Air Force takes care of business, and a 4/5 flyer for 5 is already a nice beefy body, good blocker, good attacker. So, in the Birds deck, it's probably like a B, and just, on average, it's probably like a C+ or a B-.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Mind Spiral is 4 and a blue for a sorcery at common. It says, gift a tapped fish. Target player draws 3 cards if the gift was promised. Tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it.
So basically, you're playing a 5 mana draw 3, and if you want to keep them off your back, you can give them a fish in exchange for locking down their creature, which is pretty nice. Like, imagine they have a 4/4 in play, and you're just like, all right, Mind Spiral, tap down your 4/4. I've got a 2/2 in play, so you can't even attack with your fish. I think that's reasonable. Casting Mind Spiral and drawing 3 cards means it sets you up for a good play the next turn.
I'm just really skeptical. Sorcery speed, draw 3 that offers a little bit of protection.
Well, the thing is, giving them a fish for protection is taking a bit of card disadvantage, right, in order to get on board a little better, or to have a better board position, because they don't get to attack with a big creature.
Right.
When you've drawn 3 cards, trading a card for better board position is kind of what you want to do. That is the exchange you want to make.
It is true.
I think Mind Spiral is going to play out a little better than it looks, but I don't think it's a card at 5 mana you're supposed to spend a lot of time prioritizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is I wouldn't pay 5 mana for 3 cards. I would pay a lot. I would pay more than a tapped fish for 5 mana, draw 3, tap, stun and tap a thing. So this is probably somewhere in between. But I don't know, man. I'm skeptical. I'm going to say D for Mind Spiral. I'm really skeptical of cards like this now.
I think this is probably like a C minus, where the blue-black or blue-red decks are going to want one of these if they don't have other card draw. But if you look at, just scan blue. We haven't even gotten to Calamitous Tide, which is also in this category. We're about to get there. But like Mind Spiral, Calamitous Tide, Spellgyre, Pearl of Wisdom, like there's a pretty good amount of ways to draw cards.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even count like Pond Prophet at the blue-green hybrid. Otterball Antics is like a flashback card. Like the preponderance of card draw makes it so cards like Mind Spiral are all less important. Even though you do want some amount of card draw in some of these style of decks, you will end up in a spot where if you can get a Spellgyre, then a Mind Spiral is not something you need to take in pack 1.
Yeah, I feel like they're going to end up in the sideboard a lot of the time. Next is Sky Skipper Duo, 4 and a blue for a 3/3 bird frog at common. It's got flying. Oh, it's a bird and a frog. Okay, and this is the duo. Gotcha. When it enters, exile up to 1 other target creature you control. Return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step.
Yeah, and so in the frog deck, it's got the exile thing. In the bird deck, it's a flyer that also the blink can also be good there. At 5 mana, you don't want to end up with 4 of these or 3 of these, but taking one of these and to have at the high end of your curve, I think is pretty good. You're pretty frequently going to be able to convert blink into drawing a card. Yeah. Or at least something similar to that. So 5 mana, 3/3 flying, draw a card. Yeah, I would play a lot of that card.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I think that this looks like it works out pretty nicely. So I'd probably say it's like, it's a C level card. You can probably take it closer to C minus level, just because you're gonna get 5 drops event, at some point.
Exactly. Here's Calamitous Tide, the one you mentioned. It's 4 blue for a sorcery. It's uncommon, and it says return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Wow.
So it's sorcery speed. You got to watch out for that. Some of these cards, I drafted 2 of these and I thought it was instant until the first time. Luckily, I didn't pass the turn intending to cast it. But bounce 2, draw 2, even though you have to discard a card, does kind of the board has to be pretty ridiculous for you not to end up in a decent spot after bouncing their 2 creatures.
Definitely.
And then the 2 cards you get, which, plus it's a break even on cards because it's draw 2, discard 1, and this costs you a card. But draw 2, discard 1 on top of this effect, I think is pretty good. So
I do too.
I would say Calamitous Tide is probably like a C level card,
yes.
C plus maybe. But you don't want a lot of these, but I would have to have a hard time imagining a blue deck that doesn't want 1 or 2 cards of these like 5 or 6 mana, powerful effect. You just need something powerful to do because you will get to 5 or 6 mana.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, these are similar Mind Spiral and Calamitous Tide where they affect the board and get you cards. The draw 2, discard a card is when you're at this level of mana where you've already got 6 mana isn't bad either. It's usually like you draw a land and a spell and you just keep the spell. Daring Wave Rider is 4 blue for a 4/4 Otter Wizard and uncommon. It says, when it enters, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead.
Yeah, pretty good. Kind of like Snapcaster Mage, Snapcaster Otter here. 6 mana for a 4/4, which is pretty beefy. Like, this is how I'd want to, top my curve in a lot of these decks. Like, this puts a 4/4 into play that's like a huge, kind of body that is going to have a big effect on the board. And then presumably casting a 4 mana or less spell is going to like kill one of their creatures or draw you 2 cards or something.
Totally.
Bounce one of their creatures with
this card's
the bounce spell, the Dire Downdraft. So
yeah, I like this.
I like B for Daring Wave Rider.
Me too.
Good reward for having spells in your deck. And speaking of which, Eddie Merc Crab's our last blue card here. 5 blue for a 5/5 Elemental Crab at uncommon. It's got flash. It costs 1 less to cast for each instant sorcery in your graveyard. So starts at 7 mana. If you can get it to like 6, it's okay. 5, it's great. And when it enters, tap up to 2 creatures, though it does enter itself tapped if it's not your turn. So you can't flash it in to block, which does kind of remove the question where you just go beginning of combat, you just cast this tap to tap 2 of their creatures, kind of fog their combat step, and end up with a 5/5 that attacks. Or if you're on the offense, you just cast this, tap 2 creatures, attack them, and then this is actually back to block because on your turn it enters untapped.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. So they gave us something in between by having it tap up to 2 target creatures when it ETBs. And then, as you mentioned, very, very good on your turn as well. So the question I'm going to ask is, at what point are you happy paying this? 7 mana, too much. Is it 5? Is it 6? It's definitely 4. I would say somewhere between 5 and 6 is already in the range I'm pretty happy.
At 5, you're happy.
Yeah.
At 6, it's okay.
Yeah.
So, and the dream of casting this for 4 mana is pretty real in these decks.
Man, and with all the surveil plus, just simply casting instants and sorceries, 5 feels very attainable in this set for Eddie Merc Crab to be cast at. That wouldn't surprise me at all if you routinely just cast this for 5 mana. And I like that.
Yeah, that probably leaves you at probably about a B- for Eddie Merc Crab is my guess.
That's very powerful. All right, B- for Eddie Merc Crab. That'll move us to black. Our first card is called Bone Cache Overseer. This is black for a 1/1 Squirrel Warlock at uncommon. You can tap it and pay a life to draw a card, but you can activate only if there are 3 or more cards left in your graveyard. Only if 3 or more cards left your graveyard this turn, or if you've sacrificed a food this turn.
Basically, if you
couldn't
foraged.
just say foraged.
Well,
whatever.
I guess
that's what they're saying.
Well, the reason it's better is because this works if you just sack a food to gain 3 life. Like if
if you exile. Okay, I get you. Yeah, if you're not specifically foraging.
3 cards leaving your graveyard is pretty hard to do without foraging. Like you'd have to cast a double Raise Dead and do something else.
Mm-hmm. But like in other formats or whatever, right?
Yeah, but what has come up, because I've actually had this card in a couple decks and it's been really good if you enable it, is the board stalls out. You're like, all right, pay 2, sack a food, gain 3, tap this, pay a life, draw a card, and that's just like a good deal, right? In and of itself. So
the fact that it doesn't cost mana to activate this is huge, and
it's a 1 mana play.
Yeah,
like a 1 mana play is great. So I think Bone Cache Overseer is a B in the Squirrel deck and an F outside of it. Like it's a build around. So this gets I would say build around B. If you're doing the foraging thing, then Bone Cache Overseer is a fantastic card. You only need to draw 1 card to feel like you got a good deal. And this can draw like 3 pretty easily.
Yeah, any deck that can make food or do that's great. Next is Ravine Raider. This is black for a 1/1 lizard rogue at common. Uh-oh. It has menace. Uh-oh. It has 1 and a black. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn. All right, that's not quite as good. I'm always scared of these aggressive 1-drops now, but this one actually seems pretty balanced.
It's going to be really good if you're red-black lizards where you really care about getting that point of damage in. Mm-hmm. So this kind of enables a lot of your other cards. It's not going to be that good in most of the other combinations. So I kind of view this almost as like a red, black, gold card. Like you don't want this in the rat deck. Yeah. You don't want this in the squirrel deck. And I don't think you want it in the bat deck either. So it's really just a red, black, gold common, but it's a good one. It's C in the red, black deck and kind of like unplayable outside of it.
Yeah, very much an enabler. There's been a few cards in the past that have been like that. Next is Ruthless Negotiation. This is black for a sorcery at uncommon. It says target opponent exiles a card from their hand. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, draw a card. And as you might imagine, it actually has flashback. Flashback is 4 and a black on this bad boy.
That's so you nice. Get for 1 mana, you just trade 1 for 1. You for their worst card. Maybe you fill your graveyard for threshold, or you trigger your spells matter stuff if you're blue-black with some of the spells blue cards, and then you flash it back for them to discard a card or exile, even better, and you draw a card. Yeah. That's pretty decent. I would be happy with Ruthless Negotiation if I had a way to get a little more bang for my buck. Like I don't think I would be putting this card in, certainly not in like red-black aggro. I would definitely be more interested in like a blue-black deck that cares about threshold, is self-milling, just has a lot of ways to get extra value from this, or in a black-green deck that has like a bunch of cash grabs. That's the green card that I'm going to talk about a lot because I think it's like the most important green card, green common, but where you're milling yourself a bunch. Would I play this in like a black-white deck that's just kind of randomly? I don't think that it would be great there because this is an expensive way to get card advantage, but it is not a card that I think quite gets there by itself.
This is a 3-for-1 overtime, but it's a really long time.
Yes.
And they get to choose a lot of what happens here. Yeah. So what grade would you give it then in the deck that it actually wants it?
I would give it a C. I don't think it's like a huge priority.
C. Agate Blade Assassin is next. It's 1 and a black for a 1/3 lizard assassin at common. It says whenever Agate Blade Assassin attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So here's another enabler.
This one is kind of like a dual class enabler because it also works in the bat deck.
Right, with the life gain and life loss stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so Agate Blade Assassin, it's a C for lizards or bats, and I don't think playable in the rat deck or the squirrel deck.
Okay. And this is the type of card that will get you a couple of activations, kind of whatever, right?
And you can always throw it in for one last hurrah when you know it's going to die.
That's right. Okay. Bandit's Talent is next. This is a class. It's 1 and a black for a uncommon class. And base level is when it enters, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard a non-land card. So you're getting a spell or 2 things. And then you can play black to level it up to level 2, where it says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. So that's before the draw step as well. And then you can pay 3 and a black to bring it to level 3, where it says at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand.
So the way this plays out is they cast this and you discard, either a spell or 2 lands. And then next turn, at some point they level it up, and then you kind of are forced, especially if they've gone all the way to level 3, to just always just keep 2 cards in hand. And that is like a punishment. Like you end up in a spot where you can't play a card that you want to play because you don't want them to draw a card. The losing 2 life part isn't like the end of the world, though. Obviously, all things being equal, you'd rather not do that. Mm-hmm. So as like kind of a discard spell that at some point can kind of force them to keep 2 cards in hand, it's pretty good. It's fine if you have the time to do it. Where it gets really nasty, though, is they keep 2 cards in hand and you hit them with another discard spell. Because then all of a sudden you've reset them, they lose life on their turn. And if you've discarded them down to 0 even, you get to then draw a card on your turn. So there are a couple other cards. There's there's Mind Rot in the set. There's a uncommon 2/2 that makes them discard a card. Like where Bandit's Talent really kind of breaks them is when you get to circle up and double dip by making them discard once they've held cards in hand late game. So
Right.
I think this is not a card that you're going to be interested in an aggressive deck that much, but it is a pretty good card in like a slower deck that can afford it, especially if it has other discards. So I'm thinking blue-black is probably the best home for this.
Okay.
I could see it in some kinds of green-black decks. I don't think red-black is that likely to. Black-white actually could too. Black-white can be a slow deck, I think. So yeah, Bandit's Talent is a fine card, and it works better with other discard, but it's probably like a C-level card. It's probably about an average card. You can just make it a little better than that.
Are you basing that mainly off of just the base level?
I think it's a C-level card, base level. If you need something that'll help you kind of win a longer game card advantage-wise. I think it becomes like a C+ once you add 2 more discard spells.
Okay. Next is Bonebind Orator. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 Squirrel Warlock Bard. It's common. It has activated ability 3 and a black, exile it from your graveyard, and then you can return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a potential, surveil, self-mill, it dies, get some value out of the graveyard thing. That's instant speed, so that's kind of nice. And you're getting a 2-mana 2/2 with a potentially relative creature type. Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, I mean, squirrels want self-mill, so it's good in that deck. Same with rats. It's also a 2-mana 2/2. You just get to like beat down. So I think it's probably going to be about a C minus level card when you're talking lizards and bats. And when you look at the rat or squirrel deck, it's like a C, not even like a C+, just a C.
A C.
But it is nice. I mean, these decks really go through their whole deck. Having one of these in your deck so that you don't have to stress about milling your bomb is really cool.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah. So C-ish for Bonebind Orator. Next is Feed the Cycle. This is 1 and a black for an instant and uncommon. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, forage or pay black. And what does it do? Destroy target creature or planeswalker. So you can pay 1 black and just have it be a straight up murder / planeswalker. Mm-hmm.
And then if you need to, or you have the resources, you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard, or you can sack a food. And in the squirrel deck, it's actually even upside because there's all these cards that key off foraging. Imagine they block your Corpseberry Warlock, right? The 2/3 hybrid card. It's a 4/5. They block it with a 5/5. You're like, feed the cycle your other creature, forage to pay the additional cost. My Corpseberry guy gets +1/+1 counter. So it actually becomes upside. So it starts out good. It has upside. I mean, this is a B level card. I would say B+ even. It's just a really good, efficient removal spell that in the right deck even gets you additional value.
Definitely. Yeah, these are the types of cards that creep up into that upper B range pretty often. Next is called Fell. Oh, one word card here. 1 and a black for a sorcery. It's uncommon as well, and it says destroy target creature. Yeah, now they kept it simple.
Not much to say here. It's a B. You just want it in your deck. It just kills anything. It's not quite as good as Feed the Cycle. I think Feed the Cycle is actually a better card, but Fell is also quite good. So
very
no real complaints here.
Yeah. What about Persistent Marsh Stalker? That's
when you have a fan that won't leave you alone.
Yeah.
It's 1 and a black for a 3/1 Rat Berserker at uncommon. It has +1/+0 for each other rat you control, and it has threshold. Whenever you attack with a rat, you can pay 2 and a black to bring this back tapped and attacking. So if you have 7 cards in your graveyard and attack with a rat, this can come back for 3 mana.
And it's attacking as well. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So this is pure rat.
I mean, this is about as ratty as it gets. Like, It cares about having more rats in play. It cares about attacking with rats, and you have to have threshold. Where does this go? It goes in the blue-black rats deck. Is this good in like red-black? Yeah, probably fine. 2 mana, 3/1 that maybe has some, like there's some aggressive rats that you'll have in that deck. Couldn't this go in the squirrel deck? I don't think a good squirrel deck will want this. Yes, you can self-mill it, and so maybe get some value that way, but I don't think you're going to have a lot of random rats floating around. So it's deck to deck, but I think it's like a B- in the rat deck and like a C everywhere else is about where I'd put it.
That looks right.
It's a solid card.
Another one-word card here. It's Savor. This is 1 and a black for an instant and a common. It says target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Create a food token. Dang, that's nice too. This removal, I mean, other two are uncommons, but this is the small common black removal spell. That's very good.
Yeah, I think that Savor's a C+ in most decks because kill a creature, get a food, even just a small creature, still good value no matter what you're doing. And then it's almost like B- level in a really dedicated squirrel deck, because I think that the squirrel decks basically turn food into cards at about a 1-to-1 rate, 0.8 to 1 rate, something like that. Mm-hmm. So in a squirrel deck, this reads closer to, target creature gets -2/-2, draw a card.
I see. And do you have a sense for where the bottlenecks are? Like, is it creating foods or getting stuff in the yard for foraging, or is it like foraging payoffs that are the harder thing to find?
I don't know draft to draft where it's going to be, but I suspect it's going to be kind of like when you're drafting Reanimator and Vintage Cube, and it's like you just have to balance. You want to make sure you have a good amount of both of them. So like, once you have a bunch of ways to get value from foraging, then I need to up my food production. But you could also easily end up with lots of ways to make food and not that many ways to forage. You probably want as many of each as you can get, and you want them in close to equal proportions. Obviously, if one's a really good card, you want more of that card. But assuming they're all about the same power level, you probably just want to keep the levels about equal. So you're basically maximizing the best case and minimizing the worst case. The best case is one of each. The worst case is too many of one, not enough of another. So just keeping them even, I have to imagine, is about where you want to be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that food is preferable in some ways, just because if you do have anything that cares about threshold or whatever, you don't have to exile those cards from your yard and you can keep it. Also, food is a little more flexible. Cards in your yard usually don't do much, and food you can turn into life.
Yes, my priority with how to forage has generally been exile from my graveyard before eating food, because food in play is a little bit more useful.
Okay. What do we like for Savor? C+, C?
I think C+. I think it's a little even better than that in the squirrel deck, but I think C+ is about right, which leads us to Stargaze. It's X black sorcery at uncommon, and it says look at twice X cards from the top of your library, put X in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose X life. So let's say you casted X = 3, you pay 5 mana, you look at 6 cards, you keep 3 go into your graveyard, which is great, and then you lose 3 life. Sounds like a totally fine deal if you can, kind of get to the board to that point. I think this is what you need if you're not playing blue and you don't have enough card advantage. So I'm looking at like black-white and black-green primarily for this. Like the black-white bats deck, let's say you have a bunch of life gain. Well, this is a good way to turn some of that life into cards. And then the black-green deck can usually build up a lot of mana, can gain life from food. So if you can cast a Stargaze for 5 mana and don't lose the game like very quickly after that, I feel like you're going to have a pretty big advantage.
Does the bats deck or whatever it was, the uncommon we had said it cared about life loss or life gain on your turn. Is that typical, or is it mainly just life gain?
No, that's that card.
That's only that card. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think
this triggers that, but not a whole bunch of other stuff in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it feels like you said if you have a way to build up your life, having one copy of Stargaze in your deck would be worth it.
I kind of view this as like a build around B.
Yeah.
Where when you can have the deck for this, casting one of these, drawing exactly one of these a game can be huge.
Huge.
But you just can't put it in a deck that's not good enough at stabilizing, that's not good enough at gaining life, that doesn't want to go to the late game. Like, can't imagine very many red-black decks want to spend 4 or 5 mana on this.
I think this deck, I would guess that this card lowers your win rate in those type of decks versus, average replacement card. Starscape Cleric, 1 and a black, 2/1 Bat Cleric at uncommon. It's got Offspring, 2 and a black. It's a flyer, but it can't block. And it says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life.
So this is a good way to close out the game, and it gets things started quickly too. Like if this isn't your opening hand, probably just play it on turn 2, assuming you don't have other 2s to play. In the late game, you play this for 5 mana, you put 3 power in the air, and it also starts to threaten to drain them for 2 a turn pretty easily.
But it
with
doesn't.
your other life gain effects.
Yeah, you need to support it though. Right? It doesn't actually do it itself. Okay.
But it's all aggressive. The one downside of this is it's not defensive at all, and that deck I think has a a decent amount of time where it wants to go to the late game. So I think Starsafe Cleric is still like a B-. Like this looks like a very threatening card, but it is a card that some of the times you're going to be disappointed that it doesn't help defend you at all.
Next is Consumed by Greed. This is 1 black for an instant and uncommon. It says gift a card. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. If the gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Wow. That's an instant also? Man.
So, 3 mana to kill their best thing, presumably. If they have a tie, they
almost
get to choose.
always is their best thing, yeah.
But yeah, most of the time it will get the thing you want to get. And then if you think a random card is worse than the creature you're bringing back, you should just make that exchange, which most of the time it will be.
Almost always. I mean, a random card, is 40% of the time a land. Yeah. And you're getting like a literal, creature spell back. Man, that's a nice one. Wow. I really like that card.
Yeah, I think Consumed by Greed is a B. I had 2 of them in a squirrel deck, and it was pretty nice with some good self-mill to give you some options.
Would you consider B plus, or is it a B?
I think B. I think the double black cost is a pretty severe thing.
Okay.
Like I think I would take Feed the Cycle over Consumed by Greed in general, for example.
Okay. What about Dagger Fang Duo?
Nice little crossover. It's 2 and a black for a 3/2 rat squirrel at common. And as you can guess, the rats and the squirrels both want this card. It's got Death Touch, and when it enters, you may mill 2 cards. So obviously great in the Threshold deck, and the Squirrel deck also is the self-mill, so just fits perfectly into both. 3/2 Death Touch, can brawl pretty well, can always take something down. I think Daggerfang Duo is a solid C, but just a card you'll be happy to play in either of those decks. And really not the worst if you have to play it in your Bat or Lizard deck as well. It just has a good effect on the board.
Yeah, this is the first time we've seen just straight up mill. They've been, on the other cards we've seen, they've been using Surveil instead, which is more powerful and more interesting version of mill. But this being kind of a run-of-the-mill common, mill 2 seems very, very nice on this. It's also cool that it's a May, like they don't back you into a corner with it. Dire Sight, 2 and a black, sorcery at common. Surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. You lose 2 life.
I mean, this is a very scaled down version of Stargaze where you do get to spend some mana and some life to draw some cards. Look, if you can afford to cast this card, it is a good card. Surveil 2, then draw 2 is going to set you up pretty nicely for the future.
I agree.
And I think that Dire Sight is a fine way to convert mana and life into more cards. Which decks want this? Yeah, sometimes the Bat deck, sometimes the Rat deck, maybe the Squirrel deck, but I don't think that often it's going to be that, and almost never the Lizard deck. It's funny, the Lizard deck is the outlier when it comes to these black decks, I kind of feel like.
Yeah. C- for Dire Sight?
I like C-, yeah.
Moonstone Harbinger is 2 and a black for a 1/3 Bat Warrior at uncommon. It's got Flying and Death Touch. Man, 3 mana, 1/3 Flying Death Touch is really annoying. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, here's another one, but this is also uncommon. Bats you control get +1/+0 and gain Death Touch until end of turn. This ability triggers only once each turn. Wow.
Oh, you're right. I guess I just didn't run into these. There's like 3 or 4 cards that say if you lose life during your turn. Okay. I think 3 actually. But
so something to consider for the Dire Sights and Stargazes.
Sure.
This Harbinger gets there. Sweet.
Well, it gets there without even the second text. 3 mana, 1/3 Flying Death Touch is just a fine place to start.
Definitely.
And then sometimes your bats are going to get +1/+0 and Death Touch. Sure. I like C+ for Moonstone Harbinger.
Same.
Solid
at least.
Little card.
Yeah. Nocturnal Hunger is 2 and a black for an instant. It's common, and it says destroy target creature, but it's also got Gift of Food. If the gift wasn't promised, you lose 2 life.
So 3 mana instant, destroy any creature, you lose 2 life, or you give them a food token. Which one you want to do will just highly depend on what else is going on, of course.
How they can take advantage of the food. If you're trying to grind out a quick win.
If you're ahead, then you want to usually lose 2 life. If you're behind, you usually want to give them a food. It's pretty much the way it goes.
But I mean, like the Squirrel deck can use the food a lot better than like the Prowess deck or something.
Right. You give the prowess deck a food. They're not necessarily going to even have time to use it. The scroll deck, of course, you don't want to give a food. I would say Nocturnal Hunger is like a C plus. I think it's maybe B minus. It's a pretty good removal spell, but there's a pretty good amount of removal spells. So and it's understandably worse than, I think it's worse than the uncommon ones, and it's about on par with Saver. So yeah, about a C plus, B minus.
That's
maybe
what I
a little
think
better
too.
than Saver.
Very, very solid. Both Saver and Nocturnal Hunger for the common removal spells look really solid. Instant speed as well. Next is Psychic Whirl. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. It says target opponent discards 2 cards. So here's the mind rot you talked about. And then it says, then if you control a rat, surveil 2. Wow.
I mean, that's a powerful ability. I don't think the surveil part, like the rat part, is a huge indicator of whether you want this card in your deck. It's more, can I afford to spend 3 mana on a mind rot? And if your deck's constructed such that you can, this card's a little more interesting. I could see like a bat deck wanting it that has like a lot of good removal and just wants to start getting some card advantage. If I have Bandit's Talent, the class, I'm a lot more likely to want to play this card. I think they work really well in concert. And if you have a lot of rats and you really need to get to hit threshold, then yes, this card does fit into that deck as well. So I think Psychic Whirl is like probably around a D level card, but you will play it sometimes.
Yeah, these usually fall into that spot. Now, next is Scales of the Shale. This is 2 and a black for an instant at common. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each lizard you control. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. They really wanted the combat trick for the lizard deck, it looks like.
Yes, this is straight up like put this in the lizard deck. I mean, it's a good combat trick if you especially if you're casting it for 2 or 1 mana. At 3 mana, I'm not loving it, but at 2 or 1 mana, I think that Scales is pretty good.
Do you think it would have a spot at all in the Bats deck, given the lifelink part of the equation?
Definitely could. If you have a lot of cards that key off life gain, then you look at this card and it's like, well, this is like a pretty solid way to get, an extra trigger on one of my cards. So I would say this is like a D plus. But if you can get extra value by having lizards or having life gain triggers, then you can bump it easily to a C.
Okay. Next is Starlit Soothsayer. This is 2 and a black for a 2/2 Bat Cleric at common. It's got flying. And it says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, surveil 1.
So I guess the question is, how good is 3 mana 2/2 flyer that just surveils 1 every single turn? Like, would you?
Yeah, I think that these decks want that.
Would you always play that card?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would. Like if it's just at the beginning of your end step, surveil 1 in this set, I would do that for sure.
Yeah, so like this card's obviously quite a bit worse than that. Can you get it to the point where it's surveilling like half the time?
I don't think so. My guess is no. I haven't seen yet, just like a card that's just like constantly going to be gaining me life at common.
I mean, you can play the 2 mana 1/3 assassin.
Yes.
Turn 3, you play this attack, ping. And then
I guess I'm looking for something that passively gains me, like that doesn't require combat or something. Because that just seems like it has a clock on it for how many times you can go.
Yeah, I would, if you can get 2 surveils out of this, I think I like it. But if you can't reliably get 2, then I'm not loving it. I think this is going to be like a D plus.
D plus.
Or so. And then the Rats deck, or the Bats deck rather, will tend to play this more often than not. Agreed.
Yeah, it's just a little low on everything. Next is Thoughtstalker Warlock. This is 2 and a black for a 2/2 Lizard Warlock at uncommon. It has Menace. And it says, when it enters, choose target opponent. If they lost life this turn, they reveal their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, and they discard that card. Otherwise, they just discard a card.
I mean, wow. It's 3 mana 2/2 Menace Ravenous Rats, but if you hit them, you get to Thoughtseize them.
That's sick.
Yeah, that card's great. Thoughtstalker Warlock is fantastic.
Man, this is a type of card where your opponent's curving out and you think everything's okay, and then post-combat they play this and everything's not okay anymore. Wow. Yeah, that's at least a B.
Yeah, I would say B for Thoughtstalker Warlock. Like, I think it's it's really good in the Lizards deck because it does exactly what you want. It's like a cheap menace creature that also strips their best card because you're probably hitting them.
Jeez, that's good.
But in any black deck, I think I would just be happy playing this card.
I think so too. Yeah, B trending towards B plus for Thoughtstalker Warlock. Next is Downwind Ambusher. This is 3 and a black for a 4/2 Skunk Assassin. We've got an infiltrator in our midst. It's uncommon. It's got flash, and it's called Downwind Ambusher. That's amazing. You can choose one when it ETBs. Target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn at instant speed. So that's pretty cool for combat. Or destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Skunk
so it's
Assassin.
Kind of cool. It's the typical like assassin creature that kills something that was dealt damage. But if that ability isn't on, which it frequently isn't, that's one of the main things that, complaints that people have about this kind of card, like is we just play it and it never works. This does get to ping something at least. Mm-hmm. So it can kind of get a card either way a lot of the time. And then when you are able to use the assassin ability to hit something big, then you'll feel pretty good about that.
It's a good card.
I don't know.
Changes things quite a bit in combat, right? End step 4/2 flash that takes out a 1 toughness creature, or block. I'm going to trade. No, you're not. 4 is a lot of power to add to the board, and at instant speed can just be a removal spell. Just it can trade for a 5/5.
Yeah. I think that
I don't really like any of these things I just listed though. Like none of these are like awesome.
I think overall Down on Ambusher is playable, but it's not a great card. I think it's probably like a C- card. Maybe some matchups it's going to be better.
Yeah, C minus. Next is Hazel's Nocturne. This is 3 and a black for an instant at uncommon. And it says return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life.
I love this card. This card is sick. It's exactly what you want when you spend a bunch of mana to draw cards, which is you're gaining life. Like,
right.
This is unlike all the other black card draw spells where you lose life. No, they lose a life, you gain a life. So I spent 4 mana to not affect the board, but guess what? Gaining 2 life offsets that by a reasonable amount. Like that just gives you a little bit of extra breathing room, and then you're getting 2 more good cards out of your graveyard. And the Squirrel deck does a good job of stalking the graveyard, though it does. Foraging does make it a little more difficult. Sometimes you have a tough choice whether you need to forage away a creature or leave it in your graveyard.
Sure.
So you have to worry about that. But I found this card to be nothing but excellent in green, black, or blue, black. Probably still playable in red, black, honestly, and still fine in black, white. Like it just looks like a card all the decks want, which I think is probably like a B- level card.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Really great late game kind of finisher type card. What does Sinister Monolith do?
It's 3 and a black. It's an artifact and uncommon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So kind of like a bat payoff, but also works for the Lizard deck. And you can also tap and pay 2 life, sack the Monolith to draw 2 cards at sorcery speed.
Okay.
So it's a card draw spell, but it can sit and play and drain them until you need to crack it for cards. And I've gotten to play with this card, and the play pattern I've found is you play this card and you let it sit and play as long as you possibly can. But if you're going to miss a land drop or you don't have a good play on a turn, go to your second main phase, get that last ping in, sack it, draw your 2 cards, and just kind of move on. So
okay. And once you've invested the 4 mana, you don't need to put any more mana into it. Just life and sacking it.
Yeah. And the paying 2 life is often offset by the fact that this drains almost always for at least 2. Because you're very rarely going to play this and then sack it that turn. So you're going to play this, ping them for 1. Next turn, at the very least, ping them for 1, then sack it.
I see. And even if you play it in your first main phase, you're getting that 1 life. So it's tap, pay 1 life in many scenarios. In most scenarios, at the very worst.
Yeah. So
it's kind of sweet.
And if you've got bloodthirst stuff like lizards where you care about them taking damage, or you have bat stuff like you getting life, it just works even better. So I think it starts at about a C, but I could see it being like a C+ in some of these decks.
I kind of want to draft one of these and just make it my win condition. Just like don't plan on attacking otherwise. I
mean, it does ping them pretty effectively.
I guess if they start playing food there, it gets kind of annoying. Next is Thornplate Intimidator. This is 3 and a black for a 4/3 rat rogue at common with Offspring 3. That puts us up into the 7 mana range if you're going for the Offspring. When this creature enters, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Okay.
I mean, that effect again, I don't think that this is a very good card in any of the decks, really, because you're not going to, like the Punisher thing, which, when you offspring it, triggers twice, right? Yeah, you eventually start getting cards, or you start losing life or whatever, or they start losing life, but it's not going to ever do the thing you want the most because they get to choose. And a 4-mana 4/3 or 7 mana for a 4/3 plus a 1/1 is not that exciting of a deal. So I think this is just a D. I don't think you're that excited to play Thornplate Intimidator.
Same. And anybody who's excited about that, they call that Punisher mechanic, that thing where they have to choose between the 3 bad things. They will pick the 3rd one that you want them to choose. Like not the first, not the second, the 3rd. Like they'll sacrifice a stupid token, or they'll discard a card. Or if they're at 20, they'll lose 3 life and keep their whole board intact. And so it's really difficult to get enough of that to have it start making a major impact. It does matter. It's just very incremental advantage you're getting. Next is Early Winter. It's 4 and a black for an instant at common. It says, choose one, exile target creature. All right. Or target opponent exiles an enchantment they control. Oh, whatever. 5 mana. Instant speed, exile target creature. These type of cards usually end up in the D to D plus range. Exile's a little better here for sure, but we're talking about a difficult efficiency situation here.
I think this is probably like a C minus. Exile, Banishing Light is a common. So getting to exile that is actually pretty strong. Though it is, note that they exile enchantment they control. So it's actually an enchantment edict. It's not destroy target enchantment.
But oftentimes they just have one.
Yes, they will usually just have one. I would say Early Winter. If you have no other removal, it's kind of a necessary evil. I think it's probably like a C minus. I wouldn't put it in the D range.
Okay, C minus for Early Winter.
Exile is also really good.
Exile's a big game for sure. Glide Dive Duo is next. It's 4 and a black for a 3/3 flying bat lizard at common. And when it enters, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Yeah, this is starting to add up. This draining and, these 2 and 3 life losses, they add up pretty quickly.
Yeah. And this, while it is a duo where it's like, the lizard deck cares about dealing damage and the bat deck cares about gaining life, this is more of a bat card than a lizard card. I think that the bat deck wants these a lot more than the lizard deck wants them. So I do think it's a good card, though. I actually think this is about a C plus level card. I mean, when they cast their second one of these, you're feeling the pressure. Like
you are.
You remember that Thrall in Ravnica, the 5 mana 3/3 flyer that does exactly this?
Yes.
That card was great.
It is.
You just put 5 in your deck and it was good.
It is. And this is the type of card that really does pile up on itself. So I like
when you cast one on 5, they can hit you and you don't have to block. You just gain 2. Then you hit them and cast another one. Now, even if you had done very little, they're already at 13 and you've gained 4 life and you have 2 3/3 flyers in play.
And that was fast.
Imagine that you played a 3 mana 2/3 flyer that when you attack, gain a life. Now the race isn't close because you've gained 3 life and they're at like 7 life.
Totally. And it adds up really quick. I like C plus for Glide Dive Duo.
I'm in for that.
Dive Duo. Next is Wix Patrol. This is 4 black for a 5/3 rat warlock at uncommon, and when it enters, mill 3 cards. When you do, target creature an opponent controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the greatest mana value among cards in your graveyard.
Yeah,
wow.
It just kills something. And the cool thing about the way this is templated, they did a good job on this, is let's say your most expensive card in your graveyard is 3 and they have a 3/3 and a 5/5 out. You get to cast this, mill 3 cards, and then decide which one to target. So if you flipped over something bigger, you could kill a bigger creature. Otherwise, you just kill their smaller creature.
You don't have to gamble. Yeah, this looks like a really neat 2-for-1. I mean, 6 mana, 5/3 is a okay body, but you're going to kill something like every single time.
Yeah, and it fills up your graveyard.
Totally.
Like, this card's great in both rats and squirrels and still playable elsewise. The one deck that might not want it is, you guessed it, the lizard deck, because it costs 6 mana and their curve is low. But even then, I think I would put this card in the deck. So I would say Wix Patrol gets a B. Really good Flame Tongue Kavu type action.
I think so too. Also, it's just like instant. Most of the time, by the time you cast this and it hits, you're going to hit threshold when it ETBs. Last black card was one of our previews. It's Huckburster Swarm. This is 7 and a black for a 6/6. It's an elemental insect, so it's not on the normal scale of creatures we have here. It's an uncommon, but it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card you own in exile and in your graveyard. So kind of wherever your creatures ended up outside of your hand or the board, they're gonna count. And this thing does have menace and death touch. So it is a beefy boy. 6/6 menace death touch. And what we talked about when we previewed the card was, at what point are you happy mana wise for a 6/6 menace death touch? And I think we decided on 5.
At 5, like 5 mana, 6/6 mana death touch, you just basically always play it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's the point where I'd be like thrilled about it. 6 is not that great. Same with 7. You could cast this card for 3 though. Like this card can go pretty low if you've got some good milling. So if you can enable it, this card's like a B. But in most decks, it's probably closer to a C+.
Yeah, this is the type of card that pays you off for reading Surveil as if it said mill and just dumping cards in your yard about as quickly as you can. That's going to do it for black. That will bring us to red, where our first card is called Blacksmith's Talent. It is red for a class. It's uncommon. So level 1, if you will, is when it enters, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Sword with equip creature gets +1/+1, and it has equip 2. And then you can pay 2 and a red to level it up to level 2, where it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, attach target equipment you control to up to 1 target creature you control. Okay, and then you can pay 3 and a red to level it up to level 3, where it says during your turn, equipped creatures you control have double strike and haste.
I feel like this is the kind of card you're not going to like.
I hate this card, but I'm going to lose to it like every single time.
It's a really good card. Yeah. I played against it, played with it. It's actually just a very strong card. It enables Valiant really well, because that's the red-white theme.
That counts.
And then even by itself, look at this natural curve. Turn 1, you play Blacksmith's Talent. Mm-hmm. Turn 2, you play a 2-drop. Mm-hmm. Turn 3, you spend 3 to level it up, equip the sword. Mm-hmm. Turn 4, you level it up, and now if your 2-drop was a 2/2, on turn 3 you attacked for 3, and then on turn 4 you attacked for 6.
And if you cast any creatures going forward, you can just dump the sword or whatever else you have.
And they get haste and double strike. So then next turn you play a 4-mana 4/4, move the sword, attack for 10.
Okay, so the question I have is, are there other equipment in this set?
Yeah, there's other playable equipment.
Okay, because if they deal with the sword, this whole thing just falls apart, right? Like if they just bounce the token or blow it up.
Yeah, or whatever. There's not a lot of ways to do that. There are some, of course. They can Banishing Light the sword. They can bounce the sword, but I think the bounce spell they have to give you a fish if they do that.
Yeah,
they can. And there's some destroy target artifact stuff. So yes, there are vulnerabilities, but this card it justifies itself in any deck with creatures. You should just put this card in your red-black deck, and your red-white deck, and your red-green deck. It's fine in all those decks. Okay. Red-blue, maybe not.
And you are looking to get it to level 3. Like you're paying, yes, you're going for it.
You're actively looking. I mean, equipping it costs 2 and level 2 costs 3, so you're not that often going to want to equip it and not just go to level 2 instead.
Totally.
And then obviously it re-triggers Valiant every turn. So
is it a B?
I would say Blacksmith Talent's a B. I think it's just a card that you can easily underestimate. I know I did, and it was very good.
One quick rules question, if you happen to know. If I have a Valiant creature, I level 2, I equip, I get my Valiant trigger. At the beginning of combat on your turn, attach target equipment you control to 1 target creature you control. I can't reattach one that's already on there to get the trigger again, can I? To the same creature?
You can.
I can't.
Valiant only triggers once per turn, so the same creature's not going to trigger twice in the same turn.
But it does count if I pay the equip cost or use this trigger.
So like if you go turn 1 talent, turn 2 2-drop, turn 3 you activate it, you trigger Valiant by equipping it. Mm-hmm. Turn 4 you just target the same creature and it'll trigger again. Yes. Okay. So it is a free trigger that way. So
okay, yeah, so that helps too.
Yeah. Heartfire Hero. Oh yes, it's a B for Blacksmith Talent.
Okay, what does Heartfire Hero do?
It's red for a 1/1 Mouse Soldiered uncommon. It has Valiant. It gets a +1/+1 counter. And when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So, I mean, look, we can already tell this is a B in a Valiant deck and an F outside of it. Yep. Like, if you don't have ways to target it, it's not a good card. If you do, it's a fantastic card. Like, you play this on turn 1. If my opponent goes Mountain Heartfire Hero, I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah,
like you're not going to feel good about the situation. The card's just going to become a 3/3 or 4/4 pretty quickly, and then when it dies, you're going to take another big hit. So, I like B for Heartfire Hero in the Valiant deck. Pretty much unplayable outside of it. And then Might of the Meek is the next card, and this card's really good too. Red for an instant at common. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. It also gets +1/+0 until end of turn if you control a mouse, and draw a card.
Wow.
So for 1 mana, you give a creature +1/+0, trample, and trigger its Valiant, and you draw a card.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to beat.
In the blue, and this is another kind of like crossover where in the blue-red deck, having red cantrip spell is just something that the prowess deck obviously wants, even if it doesn't get the +1/+0 very often. And then in red-green, you're not going to be that interested. And in red-black, I don't think you're going to be that interested. But in red-white, this card's like, honestly, it's like a C+ B- level card. Like it's just so important when you've got 8 Valiant creatures in your deck, you would play 5 Might of the Meeks and be happy to do so.
Definitely. And then like you said, trample and blue-red, it's huge. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, so I would say Might of the Meek's like a C+ level card. Just know that it's aimed more towards red-white and blue-red.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's a lot of how I'm evaluating the set. Look at every color has its 4 color pairs, and a lot of the cards are good, and there's some cards that are good in all 4, right? Take out the trash when you get to it. The 2 mana deal 3, great card in every deck. Just play the card. There's some cards like Might of the Meek that hit 2 of the 4 archetypes where it's really good, and then it's just not that good in the other 4. Or a lot of the black cards were good in all the black archetypes except lizards. And just knowing where each one's supposed to go is pretty good, and they give you a lot of hints. This cares about mouses, has a mouse on it. You should put it in the mouse deck. Like that's not actually, it's a bit hand-holdy, but that is where we're at.
That is how they do it. War Squeak is next. This is like pretty good name. It's red for an enchantment aura. It's common. It enchants a creature, and when it enters, target creature an opponent controls can't block this turn, and the creature gets +1/+1 in haste.
I mean, this is we've seen this card before. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of card that is playable if you're just completely aggressive and you don't care about what happens when the game goes to turn 7. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much unplayable outside of that. So this is even more focused where in exactly red-white, if you need more ways to enable Valiant and you have a really low curve, I bet War Squeak's going to be pretty good. But I also bet a lot of people are going to put this in decks that it shouldn't be in because it's a pretty weak card if you're not doing the exact thing. So I would give it a C, but it's going to be probably closer to a D or an F if you're not really aggressive and have a low curve.
Yeah, I assume it's a D on average, War Squeak. This to me kind of asks the question, how low are you willing to go to get Valiant triggers? And this is pretty low. Next is Blooming Blast. This is 1 and a red for an instant at uncommon. It says gift a treasure, and it does 2 damage to target creature if the gift was promised. It also deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. Holy smokes.
So the way this is really going to play is early in the game, you're just going to cast it to kill their creature, and you're not going to gift them a treasure because giving them a treasure on turn 3 is disastrous.
Yeah, it's huge.
And then late in the game, you're always going to give them a treasure because 3 damage is, who cares about land number 10? 3 damage is 3 damage.
Right. Wow, that's an awesome card.
Yeah, Blooming Blast looks like a B.
Like I'd give it a B. I mean, it has
a really potential good card.
Damage output of 5. Like
this kind of card's going to end. It's going to end some games for
definitely. Brazen Collector is 1 and a red for a 2/1 raccoon rogue. It is uncommon. It has first strike, and whenever it attacks, you add a red mana, and until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end.
I mean, a little mini Magda here. You get a treasure, but it doesn't last forever. Mm-hmm. But it has first strike, so this attacks really nicely. I mean, this card is great in red-black. It's good in red-green. Red-blue, I think you should probably play it because this overall is just a very high power level card.
Yeah.
But I could see some red-blue decks not being the most interested in a creature that doesn't kind of advance their goals. And then red-white, you should play it too. So overall, this is just a B. You should put it in every deck. And it obviously gets better when you're like care about damaging them or, are looking to expend mana, which is the raccoon thing. So B for Brazen Collector, really solid card. Next up is Coruscation Mage. So this is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Otter Wizard at uncommon with Offspring 2. And it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent.
Nice.
Now we're cooking. I mean,
Offspring 2 is a good price too.
If you play this on turn 4, you get a 2/2 and a 1/1, and presumably you're hoping not to block with either of them. On your next turn, you could easily deal like 6 damage. You're like,
Totally.
Might of the Meek, cast the Otter, draw 2, cast a bounce spell or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the blue-red decks, this is a B. Outside of the blue-red decks, it's actually not that bad, like in the Lizard deck.
Yeah,
2
4
mana for a
mana.
2/2 that can ping them and turn on your, if your opponents have dealt damage stuff is good. And then it's obviously good on 4 mana as well. So I view this as primarily blue-red, but secondary in red-black, and not the most exciting in like red-white or red-green, the weakest in red-green probably.
Right.
But the rate on this card is high enough that I could see playing it in a red-white deck, especially if you have a bunch of the cantrips that give +1/+0.
Yeah, 4 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1 with some even not super relevant ability, still pretty good. I like B for Coruscation Mage.
Yeah, same.
Flame Cash Gecko is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Lizard Warlock at uncommon, and it says when it enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, you add black red, and you can pay 1 and a red and discard a card to draw a card, and of course it pays for itself there.
Flame Cash Gecko is great. One of my opponents went 1-drop into double Gecko on turn 2.
Wow, they just chained it?
Yeah, it was sick. It's an uncommon. It's not going to happen very often.
Right.
What I like
did
about
they
this
activate
card,
one of them as
they
well?
activated it with the second one. They didn't have another
Wow.
2-drop, luckily, but I still lost that game badly.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
that seems great.
It's a great card because it can lead to these absurd starts early. Like if you played the 1/1 menace creature, the lizard on turn 1,
Mm-hmm.
turn 2 you played this plus any 2-drop, you're probably going to win if you were on the play, like in a landslide, and even on the draw, that's a really, really great start. But also in the late game, this just spends 2 mana no tap to rummage. That's a good way to not draw lands, after land number 6. You sit there and you rummage once or twice a turn, and then you play your cheap spell. So I think Flame Cash Gecko just gets a B.
Yeah, I think
it's
so,
obviously
too.
better the more aggressive you are, but it's just a powerful card all told.
Yeah, rummaging and looting in sets with Threshold matters a lot too. Really nice. Next is Hoarder's Overflow. This is 1 and a red for an enchantment at uncommon. It says, when it enters and whenever you expend 4, you put a stash counter on it. So this is an enchantment that's just picking up these stash counters, and you can pay 1 and a red and sacrifice it to discard your hand, then draw cards equal to the number of stash counters on it.
So you're basically spending 4 mana total and discarding your hand with the hope of drawing like 3, 4, maybe 5 cards. My guess is this card just doesn't work very well. Like it spots you the first counter for free, but you would need to draw 4 cards, I think, before you felt like you got a deal, and that's assuming you have an empty hand. Probably like 5 cards if you have to discard a card or 2.
Yeah, at least 3. I mean, you're not doing this for 2. And the fact is, a lot of times you'll have one card kind of stuck in your hand that you have to discard. Like you're not going to be completely empty-handed. So even if you get to 3, you're really only netting 2 cards, or you're netting 1 card. But I would stay away from Hoarder's Overflow. The other issue that I have with it is what I mentioned before, which is that it's just a horrendously bad top deck, right? Like,
yeah, it's horrible, and it's also, it might say expend on it, but I don't think the red-green expend deck is really that thrilled to play this. When are you playing this? You want to play a creature on turn 2.
Right.
So
at what point in the
this
curve?
honestly looks kind of like an F to me.
I
like,
think so too.
If you put this card in your deck, it looks like you're going to lose more games because of it than win.
That's what I think too. Yeah. F for Hoarder's Overflow. Next is Playful Shove. This is 1 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. It says Playful Shove deals 1 damage to any target and you draw a card. There's another one that fits a lot of what you were talking about before with the Might of the Meek.
Yes, except I think this card is good enough that it's just great in every deck. When you kill one of their creatures with this 2 mana to kill a small creature, draw a card.
Feels
also,
real
Offspring means there's going to be a lot of 1/1 tokens around.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is at its best in like blue, red, and red, white, but it's not like red, black, or red, green are not going to play it. Like I think Playful Shove is actually a B. As outrageous as that sounds, it's just a really good way to turn mana into an advantage. If you kill something, you're up a card. If you trigger your Valiant or get your spells going or get closer to threshold, like that's all fine stuff. A 2 mana draw card cantrip with a minor effect is good, and I don't think 1 damage is really that minor of an effect. That's just almost a real card.
Right.
So,
and what you mentioned it briefly there, but you can target your own creatures with this, like to get your Valiant trigger. B for Playful Shove. Next is Rabid Gnaw. This is 1 and a red for an instant and uncommon. It says target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Wow, instant speed too, huh?
This card is just sick.
Beating. That's a beating.
I mean, it's like Clear Shot, except you +1/+0 instead of +1/+1, but it's in red, which normally doesn't get this kind of thing. It's funny because bite spells are more green because they can't get burned. Red can get burned and now just gets this too. But it does play really well. So I would say Rabid Nausea B.
Definitely.
It's a really good card.
Mana. Like
2 mana, you just get to cast it and boom.
Kill something. Next is Raccoon Rallier. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Raccoon Bard at common. Has activated ability tap. Target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Should they replace the text with trigger target valiant creature you control at sorcery speed? I mean, this is better than that, but like that's kind of what this is doing, right?
It's definitely at its best in red-white because you just sometimes you'll care about tapping it even without giving haste, right? Because of all the valiant stuff. Red-green doesn't mind it, I don't think. Like if you're planning on spending 4 or 5 mana on some heavy hitters, having them get haste is a pretty good deal. And I don't think you really want this in red-black that often, and you almost never want it in red-blue.
Yeah. Funny. I mean, it's just it's so telegraphed, right? It says activate only as a sorcery. Why? Right? Like, why would they care if you gave something haste on your opponent's turn, right? And it's like, I know why. Yep. Yeah. So in that deck, I would like it as like a solid C outside of it. In those decks, I should say, the red, white, and the red, green. The other ones I probably just wouldn't be interested. It would be a D.
I think it's a C level card in those decks and like a D level card outside of it.
Yeah. What about Sazakap's Brew?
It says 1 in red, it's an instant at common. And it has gift a tapped fish on it. And it has an additional cost, also discard a card. Target player draws 2 cards. And if the gift was promised, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So it's the tormenting voice that we see in every single set these days. You know, I wish we were maybe like a little bit less consistent at hitting that note. It feels like there's a card effects that we get literally every single set. But, you know, tormenting voice is one of them. And it has the additional twist of you can give them a tapped 1/1 in exchange for making this into like a combat trick, a valiant trigger, trading up in combat. I think that's pretty good because 2 mana instant, discard a card, draw 2 cards. We've seen already that's not quite good enough. Like it's borderline. It's not going to cost you a lot if you end up playing it, but it's just not quite good enough. Most decks want to get something for their mana. Having the option of giving them a 1/1 in order to make it so your 1/1 trades for their 3/3 or that your valiant trigger goes off and you win a fight maybe, that seems like a pretty good deal. I think Sazakap's Brew is a C. I think it's a card you're going to play more often than not.
Yeah, and this would not be the deck to pass on this effect as well, just because of the blue-red deck, right? They tend to like cards like this. Combat trick aside, which even though in a prowess deck, you'll probably take that too. Next is Steampath Charger. It's 1 in a red for a 2/1 Lizard Warlock at common. It's got Offspring 2, and it says when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target player. That's annoying.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steampath Charger is going to be quite strong in the black-red deck, but also pretty good right? Just in general. Like the rate on this is not bad.
4 mana for a 2/1, a 1/1 that are really annoying.
Yeah, double pings. I mean, it helps you expend 4 if you're in the red-green deck. So like a way to spend 4 mana that you could also play as your 2-drop is kind of nice. Red-blue is probably the least interested in this, but I think red-black is going to be very interested. I think it's fine in red-green and fine in red-white, and it's not very good in red-blue. But overall, I would say Steampath Charger probably gets like a C+ in the red-black deck.
Okay, yeah. I mean anything with Offspring 2, I'm kind of just interested in.
If you're in red-black and you play this with Offspring, now whenever you've got one of your cards you really need to hit them to make it like work.
Just turn it sideways.
Just attack with the 1/1. What are they going to do? They're taking a damage no matter what.
Yeah, that's awesome. Next, you mentioned this card before. Take out the trash. What does it do?
It's 1 in a red. It's an instant. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. And if you control a raccoon, you can discard a card, and if you do so, draw a card.
Jeez.
So the raccoon text is just giving red-green a little bit of love, but for the most part, 2 mana instant speed, deal 3. That's a B. You don't really need to delve any deeper.
Yeah, that's a nice version of that type of removal spell. Next is Whisker Quill Scribe. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Mouse Citizen at common. It's got Valiant. You may discard a card if you do draw a card, so you can rummage on Valiant.
So I don't think this is going to be part of your best draws, but in the Valiant deck, imagine if they stabilize, you can't get through, and you have like a Raccoon Rally or some other repeatable targeted effect. It's pretty powerful with Whisker Quill Scribe, because you just get to sit there and tear through your deck till you find the removal spell you're looking for or the one flying threat that you need or whatever. So I would say it's like a C- in the Valiant deck and not really playable outside of it.
Yeah, because it is just what you see is what you get, right? Like it's not really synergizing with anything particularly.
No.
Agate Assault is next. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery at common. It says choose one. Agate Assault deals 4 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Wow, so 3 mana sorcery, deal 4 in exile. That's pretty decent. And then the other option, also relevant, exile target artifact. So, when that matters, it'll probably matter a fair bit. That's a good spell.
Yeah, it's totally fine. I mean, this is a C-level card, I think, at this point. Like, you could maybe get it to C+. Sorcery speed. Sorcery speed is a little bit unfortunate, but yes, let's just go C+ on Agate Assault. Kills what you need when you need to kill it.
Harnesser of Storms. I remember this one as a preview too. This is 2 and a red for an Otter Wizard at uncommon. It's a 1/4. And it says whenever you cast a non-creature or otter spell. So this is like a pretty wide net. Like most of the stuff that we've seen are instant sorcery or whatever. This is non-creature or otter spell. You may exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You may play that card. This ability triggers only once each turn.
Yeah, it doesn't combo off, which is funny because it's a Harnesser of Storms, yet it doesn't actually storm off. But
no, it does not.
I still think Blue-Red is going to be very happy with this card. I mean, it's a 3-mana 1/4 that probably draws you a card every turn.
Yeah, I mean, most of the spells, most of the non-land cards in your deck will probably meet that requirement.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I mean, that just seems like a must-kill payoff, and it's a decent blocker to buy you a little time to actually take advantage of it, too.
Yeah, I would give Harness Storms a B. And in the Blue-Red deck, and then outside of it, probably not playable.
Probably don't want it in your Lizards deck.
Unlikely to be. Like, it might depend. I mean, I could see a Black-Red deck that has 9 or 10 spells and maybe an Otter, because there's like the 4/2 Otter, the Pathmaker that we're going to see. That's fine in Red-Black. So we'll see about that. But I would say generally, yes, this is a Blue-Red card.
Kindle Spark Duo is 2 and a red for a 1/3 Lizard Otter at common. It has tap. It does 1 damage to target opponent. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you untap it.
Again, very annoying in Blue-Red. If your opponent has this in play, it's like guaranteed 1 damage per turn, sometimes 2. But in Red-Black, you can also use this to kickstart all your cards. So, look.
Black-White wants this card the most, right?
Black-White?
Right? Oh, no, it's only for you. I see. Never mind. I mistook it. Yeah, so this one seems like a little bit lower to me than the other duos that we've seen.
Well, this one I think is very specifically the 2 decks depicted on the card. Like, I don't think you're going to put this in your red, white, or red, green decks almost ever.
Right.
But I think in Blue, Red, and Red, Black, I would say this is probably a C, maybe even C+ level card.
Okay.
Imagine you're playing against Red, Black, you're at 10 life, they have this in play. You're going to feel like you have to kill it, and it makes all their Bloodthirst cards work on first jump. So I like C for Kindle Spark Duo, but I could see it moving up in value.
Yeah, that's better than I thought at first blush. Roughshod Duo, another one, is 2 and a red for a Mouse Raccoon at common. It's a 3/2 Trampler for 3 mana. And whenever you expend 4, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn.
So this is obviously the curve out for the expend deck where you're like, play this, turn 4, play my 4-drop, attack for 4. This can target other creatures, which is nice because, that can function as a trick or push through multiple attackers. It's a C-level card. I would just give Roughshod Duo C. I think you're going to play it in red, green a decent amount of the time. It's probably fine in red, black as well. Not very good in blue red at all. And I wouldn't think red white's going to be that happy with it because red white also, it's going to spend some of its mana on activated abilities like the 1-drop white creature that we're going to see that it's like 1 tap, give a creature +1/+1. That doesn't count towards expend. So That makes this card a little bit worse there too. I would say overall C for Roughshod Duo.
What about Valley Rally?
So this is a 2 and a red for an instant at uncommon, and you can gift them a food. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. If the gift was promised, target creature you control gains first strike until end of turn. I think this card's really good because you have to start by wanting +2/+0 for your whole team some of the time. Like, you don't have to be the mega go wide deck because of what the other things this card does, but you do want to have it be a deck where +2/+0 to all your attackers actually is decent. Gifting them a food in order to just straight up win one of the combats sounds like a really good deal. Because, like, you attack them with like 2 2/2s and a 1/1, and they're like, block a 4/4 on a 2/2, block a 3/3 on a 2/2, maybe take damage from the 1/1. You cast this, you kill the 4/4, and you keep your best creature, trade, and they take 3, and then they got a food out of it. That seems like a pretty good deal. You got to trade up a bunch of creatures, win one of them outright, and maybe the food mitigates some of the damage they took, but this puts them in a position where if they block such that giving them a food wins you a combat, you're probably going to want to do that.
You want to do that.
But if they block to play around that, maybe you don't give them a food and they just take a bunch of damage, and you can set them up to kill them.
Is there a defensive case for Valley Rally?
Definitely. You could block you can block with this too. It's not only attackers. So I would say overall Valley Rally is probably like a C+ in the like red black or red white decks, and not very good outside of that.
Yeah, that does seem to have a nice ceiling. Next is Wildfire Howl. This is 1 red for a sorcery at uncommon. It says gift a card. When Wildfire Howl deals 2 damage to each creature. If the gift was promised, instead it does 1 damage to any target and 2 damage to each creature. So you can add 1 damage to something ostensibly to kill something a little bigger.
Yeah, gifting them a card seems like a lot for 1 damage, but just you have to realize that the 1 damage basically is like killing a 3/3.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's usually going to be worth giving them a random card in hand to take a 3/3 off the board.
Yeah.
I would say Wildfire Howl gets a C, but I could see it being a little higher. It's really only good in blue-red and maybe red-green. I don't think or a sideboard card. I think you'd main deck it in blue-red though.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think most of the red-green decks would too. Like, their creatures generally survive this.
That is true.
So, I mean, imagine if you have this card in your opening hand, you're playing against red-white or red-black, like, you're just going to murder them.
Totally.
So I would say Wildfire House probably a C+. You just have to be in a deck that can kind of take advantage of it.
Next is Alania's Pathmaker. This is 3 and a red for a 4/2 Otter Wizard at common. And when it enters, exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card.
I don't know why they had to give this the like Thanos art. Like, look at how intense this art is. Like, that's if you just took everything else off the card but the art, and I told you this is a mythic otter that deals 5 to every creature. When
Totally, I'd believe you. I'd be like, wow, the Otter Maker. Yeah, so this is effectively 4 mana 4/2 draw card.
Yeah, you have to cast the card the next turn or play the card. I mean, you can play lands off it too.
But it's until the end of your next turn, so you get that really wide berth. Yeah.
You have a whole turn to cast it. All your mana is untapped. I mean, this card's totally fine. I would give it a C. I could even see it being a C+ where you should take it. Like, if you don't have good high end or card advantage, this does a good job on both. Having this be your turn 4 play is pretty good in pretty much any of the red decks. So I think this is a pretty generic card. Expends 4 for the red-green deck.
Yep.
Like, it just puts a good beater into play for red-white and red-black. And then blue-red's probably the one that's least interested in this, just because, it wants to play cheap prowess creatures and a bunch of spells. But even then, this card's still totally fine.
I think
they have
so
a 3/3 out, you cast this, you're not unhappy about that. So
yeah.
I would give the Pathmaker a C. I don't think it's like a fantastically powerful card, but it's a very solid card.
I think so too. I mean, I think when you see the 4/2, you're a little disappointed, but then when you realize if you can just trade it off for anything, you're getting ahead. Next is Bramble Guard Captain, which is 3 and a red for a 2/3 Mouse Soldier at uncommon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +X +0 until end of turn, where X is Bramble Guard Captain's power. Now, does this not trigger Valiant then? Valiant said activated.
Target.
Did it say activated or spell?
Spell or ability.
Or ability. Okay, so this is a triggered ability, so it's totally fine. Wow, so this thing's awesome then. Can target itself too.
Yeah, I mean, this already gives +2/+0 to start with, and it's pretty easy to imagine basically getting double value by pumping this, which then pumps something else. It triggers Valiant.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty clearly a red-white card, but I could see playing it in red-black as well, or sometimes red-green and almost never red-blue. So I would give Brambleguard Captain a B-, and just keep in mind it's a red-white card.
Yeah, and it's effectively a 4/3 on combat, on your combat as a baseline. Next is Frilled Spark Shooter. This is 3 and a red for a 3/3 Lizard Archer at common. It's got Menace and Reach, and it says it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if an opponent lost life this turn. Menace and Reach is a really funny combo.
Look, it plays both sides, so it always comes out on top.
This is the defensive player of the year that also can score. 4 mana 3/3 Menace Reach, and it can be a 4/4 version of that as well. That is pretty dang good for a common. That black-red deck should be able to trigger this very consistently.
I think that if you can make this a 4/4 consistently, you'll be pretty happy with it. I don't think you're going to be that thrilled with it in red, white, or red, blue. I think it's going to be decent in red, black, and decent in red, green. But the red, black wants the Menace, and the red, green wants the Reach.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny.
I would say this is like a C- card, though, overall.
I think so, too, because it requires some setup. But that is kind of a jack of all trades. Next is Teapot Slinger. This is 3 and a red for a 3/4 Raccoon Warrior at uncommon. It's got Menace, and whenever you expend 4, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Jeez. Damage is piling up, man. That's like a lot of heat coming over.
And it's got Menace. So, like, you just cast this, you're going to get to attack pretty effectively a lot of the times that you see it.
This card looks awesome. I'm thinking B for Teapot Slinger.
I like B for it, too. I played against this multiple times, and every time it's been like, oh my God. Yeah. Like, this thing is dealing 5 a turn.
Totally. Next is Conduct Electricity. This is 4 and a red for an instant at common. It says it deals 6 damage to target creature and 2 damage to up to 1 target creature token.
Yeah, I mean, with Offspring around, this is going to be like kill your thing plus your, kill you and your Offspring.
Yeah,
and your whole family line.
And the family line, yeah.
But I think for 5 mana, you do expect to have a pretty good effect, and I don't think this card is like an amazing example of that. So
this is definitely in the necessary evil. When you just don't have anything else.
C- D+ range, where
I would say D+ for Conduct Electricity.
Put one of these cards in.
What about
on the
Quick
other hand,
Tusk Boar?
Yeah, this one's no joke. This is 3 red, 5 mana for a 5/5 elemental board uncommon. It has Reach, it's got Trample, it's got Haste, it's got it all.
Wow.
So, I mean, this, again, the Reach Haste.
The Reach thing, yeah.
I actually am starting to think they put Reach on too many creatures nowadays.
Definitely.
Like, after playing MH3, it's like half the Eldrazi had Reach. It's like, you don't need to do that. But anyways.
Right.
Quick Tusk Boar is a B. This card just puts so much pressure on your opponent.
Yeah. Perfect curve topper, just slamming.
Really, the only red deck that's not going to want it, I think, is probably red-blue. I think all the other red decks are going to be pretty happy playing this card.
But they just are interested in getting like large chunks of damage through. So maybe this would be one of those few slots that isn't
right, where you're like
prowess.
You spend your first 4 turns killing their things, and then you just cast this on 5, and then hope that it can't deal with it because you can deal with all their next things as well.
Right, because it does clean up the mess pretty quick. Reptilian Recruiter's our last red card. It is 3 red for a 4/2 Lizard Warrior at uncommon. It's got Trample. It doesn't have Reach. And when it enters, choose target creature. If that creature's power is 2 or less, or if you control another lizard, gain control of that creature until end of turn, untap it, and it gains haste until end of turn.
So it's a Zealous Conscript that can only steal small creatures, except if you have a lizard to kill anything.
Then it can steal anything.
Does have Trample, not Haste like Conscript, so it's not quite as much of a swing. But if
what if you just always had a lizard? This would be nice, right?
Because at the very least, it's also can just haste itself.
Sure.
Which is pretty neat.
Choose target creature. And it counts itself as a lizard in that transaction as well?
No, you have to control another lizard.
Another lizard, okay.
So, but still, if you have another lizard out, this thing can just haste itself up, which is pretty nice. I would say Reptilian Recruiter is probably like a B minus. It's a good high end for the lizard deck. That's about where it's going to fit.
That maybe, seems fine. Yeah.
Maybe sometimes you'll play it in red white, but I don't think you're playing it in most of the red decks.
Right. We don't have a sacrifice theme to really make this thing hum, but it's still powerful. Green? Green is next. First green card is called High Stride. It is green for an instant at common. It says target creature gets +1/+3 and gains reach until end of turn. Untap. It's just like they just throw reach on everything. Draw 2 cards. Target creature gets reach.
This is a D. It's not giving you like an incredible amount of value. No, so I think
mediocre combat.
Just give it a D and move on.
Next is Longstock Brawl. This is green for a sorcery. It's common. It says gift a tapped fish, which by the way happens to be like, that has to be like top 5 best
magic
rules text.
Lines of rules text.
Gift a tapped fish. Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. Put a +1/+1 counter on the creature you control. If the gift was promised, then those creatures fight each other.
So sorcery for a green to have a creature fight is not too bad. Green's got some beefy creatures in these decks, you know.
Mm-hmm. Green, red, yeah.
Giving them a fish to get a counter and win that fight is so good. Like that is a really big advantage. I think that Longstock Brawl is going to be a card you're happy to play in any green deck.
That's huge. Especially because the fish is tapped. Because you know what often happens is you win the fight and then that clears up combat for the thing that just fought. But if they got the fish tapped, they could either chump block or finish off the thing, and they can't do that here. This seems powerful for a common. I would expect to see this card see decent play. I mean, I think it's like a C.
Yeah, I think it's probably like closer to a C plus in the right deck.
Maybe, yeah. Stocking the Pantry is green for an enchantment at uncommon. It says whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry. And you can pay 2 mana and remove a supply counter from Stocking the Pantry to draw a card.
I love this card. I got to go off with this in a squirrel deck, and it was really good. Like, this is a build-around card. It's not only a build-around card, but also very close to a green-black card. I think that's going to be where you're going to get most of the value from it. Mm-hmm. But it goes really nicely where if you get some counters on this because you play, you know, one of the like the Corpseberry Collector or whatever, there's a bunch of things that get counters, and then you draw cards. Well, you're going to draw into more cards that get you counters, and you're just going to get to keep the chain going. So I think that Stocking the Pantry is a build around B, where if you can do the work, it's really good, but you do have to be in a position to do that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. I like the potential in cards like this, but these can be a little bit difficult to get going. Next is Sunshower Druid, which is green for a 0/2 Frog Druid at common. And when it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and you gain 1 life. Well, there's your combo.
Well, that is a combo Stocking the Pantry, but also this is a good piece of material to like blink and bounce in the frog deck.
Oh, so I see.
On its own, this is too weak. Like I like red-green is never going to be caught dead with this card in their deck, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I think that in green-black with, like you said, Stocking the Pantry, or more likely in green-blue with tons of frog blinks, this is the card you want to blink and bounce a bunch of times because you get to stack up counters and gain life. Like there are ways to really make this into a real card. And again, I love sets that have a lot of cards like this. A card that's a 0 in half the green decks and actually good in the other half, like that's great.
That's awesome design. Yeah.
Like green white is really not going to be that interested in this. They do go wide, so I guess any amount of cheap creatures are good, but I would say this is pretty heavily green blue. So I would give Sunshower Druid a D, but just know that in a green blue deck, you might actually want to play this card.
Yeah. So would you give it like a C in that deck? Like just
in
a
that
playable?
deck, I think it's a C. You have to have a lot of ways to use it, though.
But
if you're asking how does frogs beat red white, it's that card. You play that card as a turn 1/1/3, and you've gained a life, and then you play your Pawn Prophet, and then when you play your frog that attacks and blinks, and you do all that, you've got that 1/3 defending you, and maybe you gain more life by blinking it. Like it can actually add up.
That adds up. Next is Baker's Bane Duo, which is 1 and a green for a 2/2 Squirrel Raccoon at common, and when it enters, you create a food token. So 2 mana, 2/2, make a food. And whenever you expend 4, the duo gets +1/+1 until end of turn.
I mean, this is if I had to pick one duo that really showed what they were going for with duos, this would be it. This is perfect for the squirrel deck. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that makes a food. And the red green expend deck, this is a 2-drop that attacks as a 3/3.
Yeah.
Like that's just
Perfect.
what you want out of
Chef's
both those
kiss.
decks. It's better in the squirrel deck. I think it's more valuable for green black than red green, but it's good in both. It's both the right types. It just does all the things. And I think it's like a C+. Like it's just a really important card for a lot of these decks. And 2-drops, you could just have as many, like you can't really have too many. Like, your 4th Baker's Bane duo in your black green deck? Yeah, sure.
Sure. Why not? Next is Bark Knuckle Boxer. This is 1 and a green for a 3/2 Raccoon Berserker at uncommon. And it says whenever you expend 4, it gains indestructible until end of turn. This is one that we had as our preview as well. Just okay. Right? We decided this is a little bit difficult to trigger like in the middle of combat, kind of when you would want to. So instead you're getting a very solid price, right? 2 mana for a 3/2 is nice. And then you kind of want to curve and be able to turn this thing sideways while it's indestructible, but also while it has, trades or better on the other side. Nothing with 4 toughness, basically.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be like a C+ level card in red green and like not a very playable card outside of that.
That's
like
what
I don't see frogs or squirrels really liking this. I guess the rabbit deck probably still plays it, but I would say overall C+, nothing special, but it's still a reasonable card.
Bushy Bodyguard is 1 and a green for a 2/1 Squirrel Warrior at uncommon. This is one you mentioned earlier. It's got Offspring 2. And when this creature enters, you may forage. If you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it.
This card is fantastic in the black-green deck. For basically, you spend 4 mana and you get 7/6 worth of stats for it. Because assuming you can double forage, you end up with a 4/3 plus a 3/3 plus 2 forage triggers for your other creatures. And if you have to, you cast this for 2 mana, and that's fine too. So in that deck, it's a B. Outside of that deck, it's probably still. I mean, it's probably still like a C. I would play this in red green. I would play this in blue green. I don't think. Yeah, I would play this in. Yeah, I'd play this in green white too. I would say it's like a C+ on all the other decks and like a B, straight B in the squirrel deck. But that brings us to the card I'm most excited to talk about, which is Cash Grab. Cash as in CACHE, as in like a cache of nuts. In this case, it's a squirrel. Falling out of a tree with these
falling after
nuts,
the cache. It looks like
acorns flying around. So it's 1 and a green. It's an instant. I even thought this was a sorcery initially. 1 and a green, instant at common. Mill 4 cards. You may put a permanent from among them into your hand. And if you control a squirrel or return a squirrel to your hand this way, make a food. So this card, if you have a squirrel already or pick up a squirrel off of it, this card by itself sets up two instances of forage. Actually, even more because it puts 4 cards total in your graveyard. So that's 3 1/3 forages plus the food. Or sorry, 1 1/3 forages plus a food. So by itself, this is 2.3 forages, and that's great for the squirrel deck. Dumping 4 cards in your graveyard helps you with recursion. You have raised deads and stuff like that. And it also gives you good card selection. You just get to look at 4 cards and choose the best one, assuming your good cards are permanents, which most of them seem to be. So
green, yeah.
I drafted blue green and I drafted black green. In both cases, I just wanted to draw this card all the time, especially in black green. You'd have these boards where you have a bunch of squirrel cards out and they're not working, and then you draw this and all of them start working.
And everything just starts singing. That's awesome.
Honestly, I think this is a B in the squirrel decks.
Really?
I think Cash Grab is incredibly important. I would take it very highly if I didn't have them. And once you get you would play up to 3. Once you
that's
get
what
2,
I was going to ask you. That's 4 cards each time you cast it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is though, the reason I actually wouldn't even mind playing 4 is they do such a good job of enabling your deck. Maybe you end up in a spot where you can't cast the last one, so it goes.
But you might have already won the game by then because of what it did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
B in that. B would you play it in red, green, or whatever? Is it even a thing?
I would not be excited to play it in the more aggressive decks. So red green, it's aggressive. I'm not that interested in Cash Grab. It does help you keep your spells, but the spell train going for expend, but it's not something I'm that excited about. In Green-white, I'm not very excited. That's a rabbit deck, and they just want to put more and more tokens into play. They don't want to fiddle around with cards like this. But in green-blue, in the frog deck, I'm actually interested and would play Cash Grab in that deck. I think it's good in that deck, and it's great in the squirrel deck. So I very much see this as a reason to be green-black. When I grade it a B, I'm assuming that's where it's going. But this is such a powerful and pivotal card that I wouldn't mind taking this early and leaning towards that deck.
A hidden gem, Cash Grab. Next is Hunter's Talent. This is 1 and a green for an enchantment class at uncommon. Base level is when it enters, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So that's already great. You can level it up for 1 and a green, and it says whenever you attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. Wow. And then you can level it up for 3 and a green, and it says at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Wow. Hunter's Talent. Hello.
This is a card. I mean,
what a
2-mana sorcery speed bite is a decent place to start. Like, I'm not unhappy about that. And the other abilities are both really good. Level 2 obviously enables level 3 by giving you +1/+0. And even just level 2, giving an attacking creature +1/+0 and trample, it just makes one of your things into a huge threat. And of course, the level 3 of paying 4 to just draw a card every turn, fantastic. I would say B+ for Hunter's Talent. It's just a premium card.
What a dumb card. Overprotect is next. 1 and a green for an instant at uncommon. It says target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains trample, hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. Wow. That is a beefed up combat trick right there.
Yeah. I mean, what circumstances does this not work in?
Right.
Offensively, you're getting trample and indestructible. Defensively, you're getting hexproof in response to a spell or indestructible. +3/+3 means you're going to beat whatever you're fighting one way or another. The +3/+3 part doesn't even matter. It could be +3/+0. I think it's just for the sake of being in color pie that it's +3/+3. But the 3 toughness doesn't matter that much when you're getting indestructible and hexproof. So
right. I guess it's just to protect against -X effects or something. I mean, this thing is.
It's not, though, because you're getting hexproof.
No, I meant like Toxic Deluge or something.
Oh, sure. Like a sweeper.
Universal.
But yes. I think
we're pretty narrow at this point.
I think really it's just because it would be weird for a green card to be +3/+0.
It just looks better.
In any case, you add all this together, and I think Overprotect really does get there as a combat trick. I think this is a C+. Like,
definitely.
You cast this card and you're just, I don't know. It's going to be good in every situation, and sometimes it's going to be absurd. Like, this is going to be high on the list of, well, I can't beat Overprotect, so I'm not going to play around it.
This is one of the better combat tricks they've made for 2 mana. I mean, this just gives you everything. Next is Pop Hatch Formation. This is 1 and a green for an instant. At uncommon, it says choose one, destroy target creature with flying, or destroy target enchantment, or draw a card and create a food.
I love it. This is a way to get your sideboard cards into your best of 1 decks. Congrats.
Definitely. They did it.
I played this in multiple decks so far, and it's been good. I think it's probably at its weakest in like red-green because you don't, or even green-white because you're not really using the food token all that well.
And every creature you control
has
reach anyway, right? So
yeah. In green-black, it's fantastic. And then in green-blue, I think it's great too. It's just a really good defensive measure. So I honestly like C+ for Paw Patch Formation, and I would lean towards always main decking it.
Yeah, the off-ramp of that last ability just changes the whole card. Next is Peerless Recycling. This is 1 and a green for an instant at uncommon. It says gift a card, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If the gift was promised, instead return 2 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand.
And once again, is the card you're getting back better than the card you're giving them? Probably. So you're frequently going to do it. But will you always want to play this? Well, there's a bunch of good regrowths in the set. So I think that it's going to be less a question of are you cutting this and more how highly do you take it? My guess is that you don't take this very highly in red-green and you don't take this very highly in green-white, but you're pretty up on it in green-blue and very, very happy with it in green-black. Green-black is going to want some kind of effect every game, I feel like.
I feel like green-black is where this goes. But the other decks, I don't know, even green-blue, did they really want an effect like this? This is slow.
If you have some good permanents to get back, I could see doing that.
Yeah.
Because I think green blue is going to play cards like Cash Grab anyway. Like I think green blue has that threshold because it has the blue threshold aspect. Okay, sure. Once you're self-milling, this card gets a lot better. So
definitely.
I think that Peerless Recycling is probably like a C-level card because most of the decks aren't going to want it, but the first kind of this effect is pretty valuable. That said, there's another uncommon we're going to get to in green, which is a better version of this, and green-black has access to a bunch of black raised dead type cards.
Yeah.
So I haven't felt a lot of pressure to take this card.
Because I would give Peerless Recycling like a D to start with at best. Like these effects are not very good. If I am self-milling, then maybe it goes up a little bit. But even then, I have to pay a 2-mana premium on my permanent.
Yeah, but if you're doing a lot of self-milling, getting that the kind of selection is good, and giving them a random card to get 2 cards back can be really strong.
That can be good too. I guess overall, I'd give it a D plus or a C minus, depending on the deck. Like I agree with you about which decks it fits
I think it's mostly a D, but I think if you're in a self-mill deck and you have no ways to get cards out of your graveyard, you will want one, at least one way, maybe 2.
Okay. What about 3-tree Root Weaver?
It's 1 and a green for a 1/3 mole druid at common. And you really do feel with these off-tribe creatures, by the way.
Okay.
Like, you will end up with this and you're like, oh, this isn't a squirrel or a raccoon. Like you're going to end up caring about that from my experience. So it is a cost, but it's a 2-mana 1/3. It taps for a mana of any color. And that's just a good card. So you are going to be happy playing this card. I think I would take 3-tree Root Weaver, in the middle of the pack and be okay with it. It's a solid card. I would give it a C. Like I think that red-green wants to cast 4 and 5 mana spells, so it'll play this card. I think blue-green and black-green can use the mana. White-green's probably the least likely to want this.
What about 3-tree Scribe?
It says 1 and a green for a 2/3 frog druid at uncommon, and it says whenever a 3-tree Scribe or another creature you control leaves the battlefield without dying, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this is one of those payoffs where every time you blink or bounce one of your own creatures, you get a +1/+1 counter somewhere. That is great. This card's a B in the deck that's doing the thing, and it's probably like a D outside of that because this is not a natural thing that happens in the course of a game.
Right.
If you don't put cards in your deck that do this, it will never happen because that's just not how Magic games play out.
Right.
So,
but you're starting at a 2-mana 2/3, which is a very solid starting point anyway.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Once again, it's in the frog deck. This is a B, and it's like a D outside of it.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it says right on it. Next is Wear Down, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery at uncommon. Gift a card. It says destroy target artifact or enchantment if the gift was promised. Instead, destroy 2 target artifacts and or enchantments.
I mean, if you have to kill 2, then giving them a card is probably worth it. Killing a Banishing Light and one of the talents or something like that is a pretty big deal.
Do you ever have to do that? Is this a card that you can main deck?
I don't think I would main deck this. No,
I wouldn't either.
I don't think we're there. So this looks like a sideboard B, where if you're boarding it in against a deck with multiple targets, it can be really good. But I would not main deck Wear Down.
What about Brambleguard Veteran?
This is 1 green for a 3/4 raccoon warrior at uncommon. And it says whenever you expend 4, raccoons you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So you cast this on 3, turn 4, you cast a 4-drop, and this attacks as a 4/5 vigilance along with your other raccoons. Sure.
That's actually fine.
Yeah,
there's no complaints here. You get a good starting point as a 3-mana 3/4, a little difficult to cast, but yeah.
Looks like a C+ to me.
C+ for Brambleguard Veteran. Yeah, it needs a little build around help. Clifftop Lookout is 2 and a green for a 1/2 Frog Scout at uncommon. It's got reach. And when it enters, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. That's awesome.
Love Clifftop Lookout. Obviously, it being a frog, and it kind of gives you a hint that it is better in the frog deck as just like a really good ramp card. But honestly, you're putting this in any of your green decks and being happy for it. 2 mana for a 1/2 reach that ramps a land directly into play. That is fantastic. So
3 mana.
B for Clifftop Lookout. Just a really good card. Good card to blink a lot.
Yes, you're even better for that. And the cards go on the bottom, by the way, so you can't do the nonsense, but it also isn't going to mill you out. Curious Forager is 2 and a green for a 3/2 Squirrel Druid at uncommon. And when it enters, you may forage. When you do, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, yeah. So that's the one you mentioned. That's really nice.
Yep, Curious Forager is exactly what the Squirrel deck wants, which is a 2-mana 3/2 that draws you a card from your graveyard, a good card, and also forages to trigger all your foraging stuff. So I would give this another B in the squirrel deck. And even outside the squirrel deck, as your only forage card in like a red-green deck, it's totally fine too. This card's fine in blue-green. Like, it's just a good rate. So overall, it's like a B- if you're not doing the self-mill thing, but in the self-mill world, it's definitely a B.
Just make sure you don't exile the card that you want to get back. Next is Druid of the Spade. This is 2 and a green for a 2/3 rabbit druid at common. As long as you control a token, Druid of the Spade gets +2/+0 and has trample. Wow. Becomes a 4/3 trample if you just control a random token?
Yeah, and that includes food tokens too. So
okay.
This has, it's obviously like this is designed to be for green-white, because there's like a bunch of rabbit offspring and like, you're playing your 3-mana 4/3.
Right.
In green-black, you could have a food token into play fairly regularly, and you'd end up with a 4/3 trample. I don't think green-black wants random 4/3 tramples quite as much as the green-white deck. So this is still primarily a green-white card, but it's good in green-white, playable in green-black, and I don't think particularly good in red-green or blue-green.
Mm-hmm. Next is Hazard Root Herbalist. This is 2 and a green for a 1/4 rabbit druid at uncommon. It says whenever you attack, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. If that creature is a token, it also gains Death Touch until end of turn. Interesting.
So your offspring tokens can attack and get Death Touch.
And they're 2 power, so they actually matter a little bit.
Yeah, and this also just pushes damage through pretty nicely. If you have like one good attacker, you can attack for an extra point. Maybe they have a 4 toughness creature. Your 3/4 is now a 4/3. Can get through. It doesn't look amazing, but it looks playable in the green-white deck and not that playable outside of it. So it's probably like a C- is my guess.
Yeah. Kind of defensive with all. It's 1/4 stats. I guess it could give it to itself or to any old token. Okay, next is Heaped Harvest. This is 2 and a green for a food. It's an artifact food at common, and it does have the food ability to tap, sack it. You gain 3 life. And it says when it enters and when you sacrifice it, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Okay, I was like, don't put it in my hand. Nice. Another little ramp card here. The Lookout and the Harvest.
This one's a lot worse. It's common versus uncommon, but you cast this, you ramp, and then later you sack it, gain 3 life, ramp again. So you got 3 life and 2 lands out of the deal. It's good in the forage deck. I think you can sack.
Because that is sacrificing it still, right?
And it's also, it is. If you sack this to forage, you will get the land. So I think if you've got a lot of ways to forage, Heaped Harvest is starting to be interesting. But otherwise, I'm not really sure which deck wants it. I don't think red-green wants it. I think it's too slow for green-blue because they need to be putting stuff on the board, not just ramping. So, and green-white certainly does not want this. So I think it's basically just a green-black way to get value out of enabling your forage cards.
And your initial take on the format from the drafts you did was that we're kind of sticking to our lane on 2 colors, and that like splashing or playing multicolor decks isn't much of a thing either. Okay.
Some people will, some decks will, and Heaped Harvest certainly makes it more likely that you can splash. But for the most part, I've just seen 2 color decks. So
yeah, and it does feel, based on what we've seen so far, that green's the only deck, with the 3-tree Root Weaver, the Clifftop Lookout, and now the Heaped Harvest. That's your ramp and color fixing color, which is kind of how it's supposed to be. Next is Honored Dray Leader. This is 2 and a green for a 1/1 Squirrel Warrior at uncommon. And it has trample. I'm so interested right now. It's a 3-mana 1/1 trample in the squirrels. Give me some counters, baby. When Honor Dray Leader enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other squirrel and or food you control. Okay. And whenever another squirrel or food you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this guy. Wow, this thing probably gets huge.
Yeah, 3 mana. It's going to be like a 3/3 or a 4/4 a lot of the time. And then
go ahead.
Grows over time.
Yeah, and it's nice because it kind of works with your curve. You play another one pre-combat. Now it's bigger. You attack with it.
The 2 mana 3/2 gold card makes a food on ETB and death. Like that's a really good card with this for sure. by itself, it's giving it +2/+2. So, I mean, this is very clearly like a B in the squirrel deck and an F outside of it. So if you're doing the thing, this is a great reward for doing so. If not, you're just not going to play it.
Yeah. Okay. Seems good. I like it. Sticky Tongue Sentinel is next. It's 2 and a green for a 3/3 Frog Warrior at common. Come on, man. It has reach. And it says when Sticky Tongue Sentinel enters, return up to one other target permanent you control to its owner's hand.
This is what the frog decks use to guard themselves, because it's up to one permanent, so you're not forced to return it. And it's a 3-mana 3/3 reach. That's a pretty good defensive measure, while also later in the game triggering all your stuff, working with all your cards. So
seems perfect.
Early game speed bump, late game enabler. That's where you want to be. I would say it's a C+ for the frog deck, and probably like a C- or D outside of it.
Yeah, you have to really care about having a 3/3 for 3 at that point. Next is Polywallop. This is a 3 and a green for an instant at common. It costs 1 less to cast for each frog you control. It says target creature you control deals damage equal to twice its power to target creature you don't control. We'll see who croaks first.
I mean, this is just, it kills any creature basically.
That's
like
obscene
twice.
in that deck.
It's a super bite, and in the frog deck, this might cost 1 mana.
Wow.
Frogs to Plowshares here.
Frogs to Plowshares, and it's an instant. Wow.
Yeah. No, I think that Polywallop is in the frog deck a B, and outside of the frog deck probably like still like a C+. Like you'll often cast this for like 3 mana. You have a random frog, or just 4 mana instant speed kill a creature. Like that is pretty good.
Yeah. Wow, really push for the frog deck. Next is Rust Shield Rampager. This is 3 and a green for a 4/4 Raccoon Warrior at common. It's got Offspring 2, and it says this creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less.
So this is the one where the Offspring is just kind of funny. It's a 1/1 that can't be blocked by a 2 power or less
slightly bigger creatures. Interesting. Yeah, so that doesn't really mean much, I guess, but whatever. I mean, it's just a free roll. Yeah.
Basically, the idea is you would play this in like the red-green Raccoons deck because you want a 4 mana 4/4 that's hard to block that expends 4 as a raccoon, all that. And sometimes on 6 mana, you'll just pay the 2 more to get that Offspring. So, you know, just like in real life, children are expensive. You don't always get to, have the resources. So, I think that C- on Rust Shield Rampager seems fine. Yeah.
Sure. Tree Guard Duo is 3 and a green for a 3/4 Frog Rabbit at common. And when it enters, until end of turn, target creature you control gains vigilance and gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control.
This is more of a rabbit card than it is a frog card. Because it's good in the Go Wide Rabbit deck. The frog part is that it's got an ETB, I guess.
Oh, like so you can blink it or whatever.
You can keep blinking. Like if you blink this and then make your 1/1 attack for 6 or whatever, that's kind of neat.
Okay,
but,
yeah, that's true.
I think it's like a C-. Like it's a fine card in those decks, but it's not a card you're gonna have to go really out of your way to play.
Pretty run of the mill common there. Treetop Sentries is next. It's 3 and a green for a 2/4 Squirrel Archer at common. It's got reach. What in the absolute is going on here? Everything.
We're almost done with all the green cards, so there's only one more reach creature.
Out of the last 2? It says when it enters, you may forage. If you do, draw a card.
So what I like about this is, besides being a nice reach blocker for the squirrel deck, it triggers all your other forage stuff. So you play this, you forage, you draw a card, and then your other things trigger as well because they trigger off you foraging.
And it's a reasonable enough body.
Yeah, I would say that this is a C, like a C in the squirrel deck and like a D outside of it. So it's a role player. It's not a great card, and it's good for the one specific deck pretty much. Hivespine
Wolverine is 3 green for a 5/4 Elemental Wolverine at uncommon. And when it enters, you choose 1. You can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You can have it fight target creature token, or you can have it destroy an artifact or enchantment. Nice. Those are all disparate and good.
Yeah, I mean, killing an artifact or enchantment is really good. Like, you'd play this card if it was just 5 mana, 5/4, kill an artifact or enchantment.
Yeah, for sure.
And then getting the +1/+1 counter is not only decent because that's the fallback if there's nothing else in play.
That this
you
is
just
a
play this
6/5.
and use that.
Yeah.
But it works nicely with like stocking the pantry, right? You've got that counter theme, and then or Valiant if you're one of your red green or green white, and then fighting a creature token every now and then this will pick off an offspring. Like,
sure.
It's got the ability to do that too. So, it's apparently a Wolverine covered in bees. It's hive spine, like it looks like it's got a hive kind of like built on top of it.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's also cool.
Overall,
does this
adds
get
up
into
to
the
a
B
B
range?
minus.
B minus?
I would say it's a B minus. It's just a very solid uncommon.
That last green card is Galewind Moose, which is, it's an Elmer. It's an elemental elk. It's a 4 green 6/6 uncommon elk, elemental elk, with flash, vigilance, trample, and reach. Actually, a stupid reach. Wow, that's a good card, though. Man, I mean, I know it's not fancy, right? It's not doing all this tricky stuff, but like big flash creatures tend to eat things in combat, and this thing is impossible to get through. Yeah. Vigilance, reach, and trample. They can't chump it. They can't. It doesn't tap, so they have to do something about it, and it has reach, so they can't stack into it either.
Yeah,
this thing's awesome.
This card actually seems great for any deck that's not going super low. So maybe green-white won't be able to afford or want to afford this, but I think green-blue, green-black, and red-green will all be happy to play it.
Yeah, definitely. That's just push raw power right there.
Yeah. I would give it a B.
It is a 6-drop. I would give it a B, though. I mean, you're going to get a 2-for-1 off of that sometimes, and then it's just an absolute... Like that
or
will dominate.
Just end of turn, play it, and just get to hit them, and they weren't expecting that.
Totally, that's a smasher. Game ends really fast. Okay, last color is white. First card up is Bravekin Duo. It's white for a 1/1 rabbit mouse, little babies. It's common. You can pay 1 mana and tap it, and have target creature get +1/+1 until end of turn at sorcery speed.
So in the red-white deck is where this is at its best. You get to trigger Valiant by using it. It's a mouse, all that. So this is like a C+ in red-white. It's like a C in green-white because cheap creatures are good. The deck wants to go pretty wide and tends to have Valiant cards in it as well. But in blue-white and white-black, this doesn't look like a card you're going to want very often. So I would say C+ on Bravekin Duo, just aim for red, white, or green, white.
I respect it. That's a solid 1-drop. Next is Crumb and Get It. It's it's white for an instant at common. Gift of Food. It says target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If the gift was promised, that creature also gains indestructible until end of turn.
I mean, this card is played out really nicely because giving them a food is just not that big of a cost. 1 mana for +2/+2 and indestructible is just such a good trick. It'll win any fight. It'll stop most removal spells. Like, it just does exactly what you want. And I would say that any deck that wants combat tricks, this is a very good one. I think this is like a C, maybe C+ level card.
Agreed. Yeah, anything that does +2/+2 for 1 mana, regardless of what else it says, is usually pulls its weight. And this has extra relevant text as well. Next is Flowerfoot Swordmaster. This is white for a 1/2 mouse soldier at uncommon. It's got Offspring for 2, so that's pretty cool on such a cheap card. It says, Valiant, mice you control get +1/+0 until end of turn.
I mean, the combos are just naturally here where you're like, play this with Offspring, target my thing. It pumps this plus the other mouse plus your other mice. You target both in the same turn, and you're just attacking for a ton. Flowerfoot Swordmaster. I mean, this is a straight up B in red, white, or green, white. Fantastic in both those decks. I don't think that you're going to play this very often in white, black, or white, blue.
Okay.
But the rate is pretty good on it still. 3 mana for a 1/2 plus a 1/1 with a relevant ability is not that bad.
Hard to turn that down.
I would want this in red, white, or green, white. Once again, those two decks overlap a lot. And I think Flowerfoot Swordmaster is a B in those decks.
Yeah, B for such a powerful 1 and or 3-drop. Next is Seasoned Warren Guard. This is white for a 1/2 Rabbit Warrior. It's uncommon. And whenever it attacks while you control a token, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn.
If you're enabling this, this is great. I mean,
it's a slammer.
Imagine, getting 3 power out of your 1-drop. Like that's not a weak ability. So it's probably like a C plus in the decks that can use it and a F outside of those decks. So I would say this is almost always going to be found in green white. Every now and then you could put it in red white if you can make some tokens, but I think a lot of the good red white decks will end up cutting this for slightly more consistent cards, whereas green white it's going to be on a lot. So I like C plus for Seasoned Warren Guard, but again, leave it to green white most likely.
Bright Blade Stoat. Is that how you say that? Stoat?
Yeah.
It's 1 and a white for a 2/2 Weasel Soldier at uncommon. And it's got 2 pretty nice abilities, especially if you can build on them. It has First Strike and Lifelink.
I mean, that is great. This card's fantastic in any deck that can cast it. So I think it's a B-. It's not like quite at the premium level of like the highest uncommons, but you're going to be really thrilled to put this in your deck caster on turn 2 in any of the combinations. So, I mean, it even gains life for bats. It's good defensive play on the ground for blue-white, what kills with flyers. And of course, it's great in red, white, and green, white. So B- on Bright Blade Stoat.
Yeah, anytime you can put a counter on it, pump its power, this card really becomes unstoppable. Next is Builder's Talent. This is 1 and a white for an enchantment class at uncommon. Base level, when Builder's Talent enters, create a 0/4 white wall creature token with Defender. Level 2, it only costs white to get to level 2. It says whenever 1 or more non-creature, non-land permanents you control enter, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So that's just when anything. Oh, non-creature, so artifacts, enchantments, that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yep, artifacts, enchantments, or planeswalkers, I guess.
Planeswalkers. And then 4 and a white is for level 3, so significantly up on price. But it says when this class becomes level 3, return target non-creature, non-land permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. Dang. I mean, this thing's cool, but I don't think I care about any of these particularly. Yeah,
this looks like a build around D, which is maybe this could be good in some deck, but is not. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like. I guess you're going to want to make a bunch of food for the second level. If you put a bunch of food in play,
food is the thing. Okay,
then you start triggering and all that. But
I can't wait for somebody to show me if this card's cool. But I'm probably not going to be the one to smash my head through that particular brick wall. I would just give Builder's Talent to build around D.
Yeah, I like
show
that.
Me the money. Carrot Cake. That does not look like Carrot Cake. That is different than what I imagined.
This card is quite good with Builder's Talent.
Okay. Yeah, let's find out. So it's 1 and a white for an artifact food. It's common. It does have the food ability that we mentioned before. And it says when it enters and when you sacrifice it, create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token and scry 1. Sure.
I mean, 2 mana for a 1/1 and a scry 1, and then you sack it. You get another 1/1. You get another scry 1. You gain 3 life. That's pretty solid. I think the green white deck will be happy enough with that. I don't think red white's going to play this basically ever. It would like not to. I don't think that white blue's going to like this all that much. So I think this mostly leaves it for a green white and black white, which both would be interested. Black white can use this to gain life and clog up the board.
But kind of low level interested, right?
Yeah.
C- interested.
I would say this is probably a C in black, white, and green, white, and like a D outside of it.
Feather of Flight is next. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment aura. Better have flash. It does. It's uncommon. It has flash and enchants a creature. And when it enters, you draw a card, and the creature gets +1/+0 and has flying.
This card is ridiculous.
That's pretty good.
2 mana for +1/+0 flying, draw a card.
Yeah, instant speed too, so you can make sure to land it.
Like this card, I think, is just very good. Like it's at its best in the Valiant deck because obviously it triggers Valiant, but like you're really not paying very much for this effect at all. You're getting your card back. You're getting a +1/+0 and flying forever. I think Feather of Flight just looks like a C+ to me and across almost any deck.
I think so too. It's also good with Builder's Talent. I'll stop with that now. Next is Jolly Gerbils, which is 1 and a white for a 2/3 hamster citizen at uncommon. And it says Whenever
There's that big
you
fish
give a
with a
gift,
bow on it.
it's got a tap fish with a bow on it. Whenever you give a gift, draw a card. That's pretty awesome. It's a 2-mana 2/3, by the way. It is an uncommon, so they push the stat a little bit. But as you mentioned, it doesn't fit with any of the themes. It's a hamster, so it's not a rabbit or anything like that. Is giving gifts a build around?
It can be. I mean,
because this is very powerful. Like if it goes,
it's also priced to move. I mean, 2-mana 2/3 that just no mana cost just draws you a card when you do the thing is really good.
If I had three gift giver,
there is just a bunch of spells that do it.
No, I'm saying if I had 3 of them, like at what point do I play Jolly Gerbils? Do I play it with no gift?
I don't think you'd want to play it with no gifts very often unless you really needed a 2-drop. I think if you had like 2, it's starting to be interesting, and at like 4, it's going to be really good.
Okay. That's what I was thinking.
You just need to draw 1 card, and cards like, Chrome and Get It are just great cards to put in your deck regardless. So
right.
A lot of the gift cards are also priced fairly nicely. So I think that Jolly Gerbils, this looks like a build around B, like a good build around.
I agree, man. You get a fish, I get a card. You get a food, I get a card. You get a card, I get a card. Like these are all fine trades. Life Creed Duo is next. It's 1 and a white for a 1/2 bat bird. It's common. It has flying, and whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life. Hey, that does the thing.
Yeah, this is a 0-mana way to just enable all the life gain while just pecking away for 2 in the air. I think that Life Creed Duo is really nice for the bat deck. Probably solid for the green-white deck as just another cheap creature to put on the board, gain some life, attack in the air, and then really not good in red-white. And I don't think all that good in blue-white just because it is a flyer, but I don't know how much they care about gaining life.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Maybe a 1/2 that gains you a life every turn is still pretty good. So I would say overall this is like a C, but trends towards C+ in the bat deck.
Yeah, for sure. Mabel's Metal. This is 1 and a white for an instant and uncommon. It says target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Up to 1 other target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Does this target both? Does this trigger double Valiant?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It triggers double Valiant, and it's just a really strong combat trick.
It's really good.
If you have 2 creatures in play, you're getting 3/3 for 2 mana, and you're doing both. So, like, sometimes you make this attack, and your opponent puts you in a position where if you've got a trick, you win one fight and lose the other fight. This might make you win both or win one and tie one, and that's just great. So you have to have a lot of creatures, but this is a pushed combat trick. There's a reason it's uncommon. I would say that Mabel's Metal is probably like a B- in the deck that has a lot of creatures.
Yeah, I think I agreed. Just in a deck with a lot of creatures, and in red-white, it's probably like a B+ or something. I mean, this is one of those ones where like a whole bunch of triggers goes on the stack when you cast this, and you realize you've just lost badly. Nettleguard is next. This is 1 and a white for a 3/1 mouse soldier at common. It has Valiant. It gets +0/+2 until end of turn. You can pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So what's the scenario? So you attack with it, they block with their 2/2, and then you Valiant it with some ability, but maybe not a pump spell that would have won that combat anyway, and then your Nettleguard.
I mean, or you
survives.
Just target it with like the duo and attack with a 4/4. And they just can't block it. Like it doesn't have to be an instant speed trick for it to be good. You equip the blacksmith sword on it, and then you've got a 4/4 that turn.
Okay.
So plus, in the late game, killing an enchantment or artifact is great. I think this is a C+.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a good
actually
2-drop.
good.
It's good early, good late. Just a good card.
Yep. Next is Parting Gust, which is white for an instant at uncommon. Gift a tapped fish. Exile target non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So otherwise it just exiles straight up?
So it's basically a momentary blink, but instead you can give them a fish to kill their creature, to turn it into swords to plowshares.
Okay. For double white.
Yeah, so if you're not gifting, you're probably exiling your own creature and having it come back with a +1/+1 counter.
I think I'd want to have that access, like my cards to care about that on some level. And obviously this doesn't really work with Valiant, right? Because, traditionally speaking, even if you're getting a pretty efficient exile removal spell here, it's tempting to say, oh, all they get is a stupid fish. But man, every single time you have to give them a creature for killing their creature, those cards underperform. It's just like across the board. I've never seen one of those be really, really good.
Oh, I kind of disagree on this one.
I'm saying I've never seen it before. Is this the one that breaks the trend?
I think so, because white instant speed, giving them a tapped fish, it's not giving them a 1/1 flyer, which is some of them we've seen. That's really bad. And it has utility on your own creatures. Like if you use this to counter a removal spell and get a +1/+1 counter, you'll feel pretty good about that.
I think so too. That just completely changes, the evaluation, the fact that you can just not do that thing and, use it as a buff for your own creature. Yeah, I think that gets it over the line because it's always nice to have that backup plan of downgrade your best creature. It just seems to be that on average that doesn't really work, but this has a whole totally another aspect to it with augmenting your own creature. So I like it.
Yeah, I like Parting Gust. I would say it's a B-. It looks like a solid removal spell.
Repel Calamity is next. It's 1 and a white for an instant and uncommon. It says destroy target creature with power or toughness 4 or greater. Can you main deck this?
I think you would main deck this. I think that you will run into some decks where you're not going to have that many targets. Like it is going to maybe struggle against like a Lizard deck where your early removal spell is just not a thing. But against Valiant decks, they'll get up to 4 toughness pretty easy. Against red-green, it's like one of your best cards because it kills all the creatures in their deck. And overall, this can be hit or miss. Like, it can definitely miss against bats. It can definitely miss against otters because they just don't play that many creatures to begin with. But it's a main deckable card. It's 2 mana. I would give it a C+. It does kill the things you really want to kill.
I think so too. A good shortcut for it is that like basically against any green deck, this card's playable. So that's like 4 out of the 10 possible decks that you're going to face straight away. As we learn more about the format itself, if green ends up being one of the better colors, then Repel Calamity becomes even more main deckable. Next is Sonar Strike. This is 1 and a white for an instant at common. It says it deals 4 damage to target attacking, blocking, or tapped creature. You gain 3 life if you control a bat.
Very solid removal spell. Dealing 4 damage is good. Attacking, blocking, or tapped means you can even kill creatures with like mana dorks. And then gaining 3 if you control a bat. Like it not only triggers the bat life gain stuff, but it's also just a good value card. So I think I like this at like C+ in the bat deck and C- outside of it.
Yeah, the 3 life is a lot and matters too. Next is Warren Elder. This is 1 and a white for a rabbit cleric at common. It's a 2/2. And has activated ability of 3 and a white, and it gives creatures you control +1/+1 until end of turn.
Very solid card in the green-white deck. A decent curve filler in red-white. I've seen it be fine there. Not great in black-white, and I don't think great in blue-white. It's probably okay, though. This is just a kind of pushed card. 2 mana for a 2/2 with a pretty strong activated ability. I really don't mind it.
I would expect this to cost 5, the activated ability, and then be very mediocre. And at 4, it's like that pushes it over the line for sure. I would say solid C for Warren Elder.
Yeah, I like C for Warren Elder. It is a good card.
Okay, you mentioned this before, but here's Banishing Light, 2 and a white enchantment at common. And when it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. This has been an uncommon since its original printing. I mean, seeing this at common is pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's a good card. It still performs, like it just does its job. So I think Banishing Light is just a card you're always happy to play across every single deck. It does open you up to some disenchants being good, right? When you Banishing Light a good card and they bring it back mid-combat, that can be pretty devastating. But I would say overall Banishing Light is probably a B- level at this point. It's 3 mana sorcery, kill anything.
Yeah, that's what I would think too. Next is Dewdrop Cure. This is 2 and a white for a sorcery at uncommon. Gift a card. And it says return up to 2 target creature cards, each with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the gift was promised, instead return up to 3 target creature cards, each with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
You're not actually that often going to play the gift, not because it's not worth it, just because you have to have 3 creatures in your graveyard.
Yeah.
But I think in a low curve deck where you frequently have 2, this seems decent. I mean, it's a good way to get ahead on value and mana.
Just in white here, we already have 8 creatures that are 2 or less.
Yeah, the curves are low.
Very low.
I think as a card in a very creature-heavy deck, as one of your few non-creature slots, in like a red-white aggressive deck or green-white aggressive deck, I bet Dewdrop Care is kind of neat. So I would give it I'd probably give it a C-, but I think
so too.
You could make this card perform.
Definitely. You just have to build towards it, not around it fully, but you have to have it in mind. Harvest Right Host is next. This is 2 and a white for a 3/3 rabbit citizen at uncommon. Whenever it or another rabbit you control enters, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then draw a card if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn. So 3 mana 3/3 rabbit. So that's all kind of check boxes. But yeah, it's pumping up. And if you ever do the duo thing, you're going to start drawing cards. That's pretty nice.
A 3 mana 3/3 that will pretty frequently draw you cards when you've got Offspring or just playing 2 creatures and giving you some pump effects until then. This seems like a B- in the rabbit deck.
I think so too.
And probably not great outside of it most of the time. If you have a lot of creatures, it could be good. I could see playing this in red-white if you have a lot of Offspring cards. Like there's a bunch of cheap ones. So
yeah, but it only triggers off rabbits, right? So it's pretty narrow. Yeah. Still 3 mana 3/3 is a card that, even if you're only getting occasional upside, you could live with. I mean, we've gotten very, very picky, but like.
It also gives +1/+0 the first time that when you play this too. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah. And that doesn't matter how many other rabbits you have. So that's cool. Hop to it. 2 and a white for a sorcery at uncommon. Create 3 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens.
There we go. Well, this is the card.
Combo. So you play Harvest Right Host, then you play Hop to it, you draw a card, you get 3 triggers. This card seems really well set up for this deck anyway, though, right? Like regardless of combos.
I think that this is a B straight up in the green-white deck. And,
exactly.
It's actually fine outside of it. Like, putting 3 tokens into play for 3 mana, that's a lot of stats on the board, a lot of chump blocks, a lot of ways to sacrifice. I bet it's like a B- overall, B in the rabbit deck.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Next is Intrepid Rabbit. This is 2 and a white for a 3/2 rabbit soldier at common. It has Offspring. Oh boy, 1. So you can just pay an additional mana.
Yeah.
When this creature enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Man. Yeah, it's very tempting to chalk that up as a 4-drop.
This card is just great in both the rabbits and the mice deck. Like in the Valiant deck, casting this, getting 2 Valiant triggers right away on 2 different creatures, and putting 2 things on the battlefield, very, very good. So I would say that it's a C+. Intrepid Rabbit looks really good in red, white, and green, white, and still just a really pushed card. I would play it in any white deck. In black, white, and blue, white, it's probably like a half a step worse, but it's still something that you're going to want.
Definitely, and it's a little bit of a pivot card there between those 2 decks. Next is Mouse Trapper. Wait, this is a mouse though.
Is it a mouse who traps or someone who traps mice? I think it's very clearly a mouse who traps.
I hope so. It's 2 and a white for a 3/2 mouse soldier at uncommon with flash. And it has Valiant, tap target creature an opponent controls. Okay, it's a mouse who traps. It's trapping them.
I mean, this has flash too. This card's nice. You just get to cast it end of turn and then just immediately wreak havoc. I think that Mouse Trapper is going to be a really good way for the Valiant decks to push damage through once they've got a good deck set up. So I like it at B in the Valiant decks, and probably like C to C- outside of them. It's not good if you're not able to activate the ability.
It has flash also, but this seems to be not super important on this card, but kind of cool. Next is Shrike Force. This is 2 and a white for a 1/3 bird knight at uncommon. And it has flying, double strike, and vigilance. Oh my God. Has there ever been a card begging for a +1/+1 counter more than this?
No, Strike Force is like, please give me some action. So
anything.
This looks to me like a card that you're going to want to play in the red-white deck because it has all the pump spells and giving it +1/+0 or +1/+1 with all its various effects. It's pretty pushed though. 3 mana for effectively a 2/3 flyer with vigilance, and then it basically gets double value from any pump spells. I'm pretty sure you're not cutting that from green-white or blue-white either. So it maybe means black-white doesn't want it, but all the other decks seem like they would be pretty happy with it.
And we're seeing a lot of like temporary buffs that we've been, Intrepid Rabbit, Harvest Right Host, those type of things where it's like you get a little bonus. Like this type of card can just eat those pumps up and turn it into a pretty quick win. I really like Strike Force. Man, it even has Vigilance too, just for that annoying extra thing for the opponent. Would you say B for Strike Force?
I like just straight up B for this. Be aware you need to be doing something more to really make this good, but there's a lot that works with this. This set is very well set up to enable that.
Exactly. Thistledown Players is 2 and a white for a 3/3 Mouse Bard at common. And whenever it attacks, untap target non-land permanent.
So the main thing that does is trigger Valiant. You attack with this and you just target one of your Valiant dudes.
So it kind of gives your guy Vigilance and Valiant trigger.
Yeah. What it also does is, you can get Vigilance, you can block with it. Sometimes there's going to be something with like an activated ability you get to use twice, but mostly it's 3 mana 3/3 trigger Valiant when it attacks, which is pretty good deal. So I would say the Thistledown Players looks like a C in the Valiant deck and not a card you're that excited to play outside of it.
Can trigger itself. Or
it can target itself. I mean, you might want this in blue-white. It's pretty big non-flyer. Like there's worse places to put the extra bonuses that you get to put on non-flyers,
For sure. Next is Rabbit Response. This is 2 white for an instant at common. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control a rabbit, scry 2. That's assuming the game continues past that point. But yeah, I mean, here's another, not that Strike Force is like some critical whatever, but like, again, another temporary buff that these type of cards really can take full advantage of. And here's your, you were talking about how rabbits like to go wide. Cards like Hop to It into Rabbit Response. I mean, that is a heck of a lot of damage coming over.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very pushed version of this. This reminds me a little bit of On the Job back in MKM. It's not quite as strong, but Scry 2 is pretty good, and that's the deck that's going to want this. So probably a C for Rabbit Response, but like you'll know when you want this. Like
definitely,
this card could be like a B+ in the right deck. You just know when you get to that point.
Star Charter is next. It's 3 and a white for a Bat Cleric at uncommon. It's a 3/1 flyer for the 4 mana. And it says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with power 3 or less from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Yeah, sure. I mean, you're getting 3 power in the air for 4 mana. And then if you're just sitting there and have any of those repeatable effects or anything, it's now generating you probably a card. I mean, you get to look at 4, and many of the bat cards are low power. Like there's not a lot of 5/5s flying around in there. So you're probably going to draw a card 70% of those looks at 4, or 80% of them. I don't know, depending on your build. I like all of these things. And then if the way is clear and you get to start slamming for 3 in the air, that's great too.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that it picks up bats is going to kind of self-fuel it, where you grab a bat and then you're able to use that to gain more life, to trigger this again, and just keep on going, that sort of thing.
I like this as a payoff for the bats deck for sure. In bats, I would say it's like a B or a B-.
I would say it's a B in bats and B for bat. And I don't think particularly playable outside of that.
I think so too. Wax Wayne Witness is next. This is 3 and a white for a 2/4 bat cleric at common. It's got flying and vigilance, and it says whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, Wax Wayne Witness gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Is that exciting?
I don't think so. Like first of all, you have to gain life before damage, so it doesn't work with like life linkers. Though I guess the Stoat has first strike, so actually it kind of works with that one.
There you go.
You do get not the biggest payoff as well. Like you gain some life, and now this attacks for 1 extra damage, maybe 2 extra damage.
Yeah.
So because you gain life twice, it doesn't care if you gain 5 life or 1 life. You just get +1/+0.
Yeah.
So I think that Waxwing Witness looks like a D. I just don't think it's very good, even in the deck where it's supposed to be good.
Yeah, you would really have to just want 4 mana, 2/4 flying vigilance. If you want that, then great, and you can take the gravy, but I don't think it's really worth going for beyond that. Next is Drift Gloom Coyote. This is 3 white for a 3/4 elemental coyote at uncommon. And when it enters, exile target creature an opponent controls until Drift Gloom Coyote leaves the battlefield. If that creature had power 2 or less, put a +1/+1 counter on the coyote. This was the preview card that we had.
Yeah, I think it's solid. It still looks pretty good. It's it's you're putting your eggs in this basket, but it's a pretty robust basket.
And 4 toughness basket, yeah,
or maybe
play
even this 5. I think it's like a B-. You'll play it in any white deck, and it'll be solid.
I think so too. B- range. Pileated Provisioner. 4 and a white for a 3/4 Bird Scout at common. It's got flying. And when it enters a battlefield, I don't know why I keep saying that, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. I don't like this without flying buff thing. Like,
not your jam.
It's just not that idea is not really resonating with me. That like the birds are helping the groundlings or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's going on with all that. Like, it does feel like it's going to be hard to manage, and you also don't really want random non-flyers in your flyers deck that much. Like, you don't naturally want that. So
right, I don't really get it. At any rate, is this card good? I mean, it seems solid enough to put into a deck. Like you're triggering what's it called? You're putting a 3/4 flyer out. Like just in red-white, if you just curve into this, that seems pretty good. You get a Valiant trigger and a big flyer.
I think that it's probably not going to be a card you're going to play in red-white very often. But
not in red-white? Okay.
I think it's just too expensive. I think that deck wants to play 16 land and all cards that cost 3 or less or 4 or less most of the time.
Oh, it's one of those decks. Okay.
I think so, yeah. But I also think that that this card is a solid card for like the blue-white deck. It's probably like a D+ level card is my guess.
Okay. Those 5s are always so difficult to find at home. Okay, we've got a few artifacts and a couple of lands, and then we are through this thing. Our first artifact is called Fountainport Bell. It's 1 mana for an artifact at common, and it says, when it enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. Ooh. You can pay 1 and sacrifice the bell to draw a card. I don't want to ring this bell, Louise.
Yeah, I don't think you want to either. They've been experimenting with like a variety of ways to make it so that you can fix your mana, but all the land on top stuff has been not that great, I don't think.
Yeah, the best part about Magic as a game is the draw step. And if I know what's coming, it ruins that one. So yeah, I'm out on Fountainport Bell. And also it does not seem like this set is set up for splashes or cares about them.
Yeah, so I think that you mostly are not going to want this card. I guess it helps get you to Threshold. It's a cheaper card that can do that. Oh,
that's true. That's true because it replaces itself. Okay. I'll go D on Fountainport Bell then.
I like it.
Okay. Heirloom Epic is next. It's 1 mana for an artifact at uncommon. You can pay 4 mana and tap it to draw a card. And it says for each mana in this ability's activation cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. And you can activate this only at sorcery speed. So it's got Convoke?
It basically lets you convoke your card draw here.
That is cool.
I haven't gotten this to work. I played it in one deck and then ended up cutting it because it just wasn't doing enough. I do think it's a cool idea. And in like a rabbit deck especially, I bet it could go pretty hard. So
like you could do it for no mana. You just tap 4 rabbits and draw a card.
Yeah, or like two rabbits and 2 mana, whatever makes the most sense.
I like it. I don't think it's good. I think these cards are just always too slow, kind of regardless, but
I think it's probably a little bit too slow, but it seems like it could be good.
I would start on D for Heirloom Epic, but in my perfect world, it's a B. I like cards like this, but I don't think
it's just kind of hard to use, I think.
Bumbleflower's Sharepot is next. It's 2 mana for an artifact at common, and when it enters, you get a food token. And then with this thing, you can pay 5 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to destroy target non-land permanent at sorcery speed. Does the food matter? I mean, these never do well. You know, these like 7 mana to kill something.
Yeah.
But does the food bridge that gap for you at all? No, right?
I don't think so. I have seen people play this against me a bunch, and it has been not very exciting.
Yeah, it's also on board, like, so you know it's coming. I would say D for Bumbleflower's Share Pod, and somebody's gonna have to show me that the food matters a lot or something to make it worth it. Short Bow. This is 2 mana for an equipment. It's an artifact. It's uncommon. The equip cost is 1. So that is the sweet spot. And it says the creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance and reach. Of course.
Yeah, of course. Reach reaches everywhere.
Yep.
But I like Short Bow, though.
I was going to say, normally we really care about the power and toughness boost, and this does give you one.
I think that in the red-white deck, you would play this card, especially if you have a Blacksmith's Talent, because then you're really getting some good value. But I think in a red-white deck, you'd be happy enough to play this card and just
pay one to trigger Valiant.
To trigger Valiant. Plus, you get to you have a pretty good card. +1/+1 vigilance and reach is no joke. So it seems like you can get some good attacks in there. I think Short Bow is probably like a C+ in red-white and not that good outside of it.
I don't know if this overlaps with the other question from before about the thing that lets you equip for free. Can I re-equip to the same creature with this? Okay.
Yeah,
I can never remember if you're allowed to do that or not, or if you have to have something to move it on to.
Maybe only confusing that Lightning Greaves stops you because it gives the creature Shroud.
Oh, that's got to be it. That has to be what I was thinking of, because that's in the Vintage Cube now, and I probably couldn't do that.
Yep.
Next is a 3-tree Mascot, which is 2 mana, 2/1. It's an artifact creature, shapeshifter at common. It's a changeling, which means it's every creature type, and you can pay 1 mana to add 1 mana of any color once each turn, so it filters into colored mana.
The changeling part is cute because it does make it so that, this is every type. It can fit into whatever deck you want, and have like a good effect. But I think the biggest problem I have with 3-tree Mascot is it's just not really a 3-color set that I've seen. Mm-hmm. So you end up in a spot where I feel like you're not getting like that much value out of that part. And a 2/1 changeling, like most decks are not going to care that much to want a changeling. So this looks like a D to me. It has not been good when I've seen it.
Looks like a D. I like it that it's kind of a backstop, but it looks like a D. Next is Barkform Harvester. This is 3 mana for a 2/3. Again, shapeshifter at common, and again, changeling. And it has, dude, I'm not even joking. It literally has reach. Like, what is going on? This has just become a meme at this point.
Our studies have shown that people didn't like dying to flyers. So,
like maybe the arena thing that says, "Did you have fun?" This match has like a negative correlation with the amount of flying death or something. Anyway, this thing has an activated ability, 2 mana. Put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Nah, come on. I would just say D- for Barkform Harvester.
Yeah, this is not really what's going on in this set, as fun as that ability is.
I mean, even you who likes to push the boundaries of how many cards you have left in your library is probably not going to run this thing. Next is Patchwork Banner. This is 3 mana for uncommon artifact, and when it enters, you choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. All right, that's pretty strong, and it taps for a mana of any color. So you get a mana rock and an anthem effect here. If you can be heavily skewed towards one creature type, this type of card can be pretty good. It's just hard to do that.
Yeah, I think that the decks I've seen so far that are like pretty into having the same creature could use this. I don't know that this card is going to be good all the time. Like a lot of the decks aren't going to necessarily have tons of the same creature. Like it's probably pretty good in rabbits. It's probably pretty good in, I don't even think mice really want it because they don't really want to ramp towards a higher mana cost. So,
so it's kind of
they're not getting much
anthem
value. Whereas rabbits, I think, can spend all that mana. Squirrels could definitely use it because they can use that mana, and you might have a bunch of those in play. There's some things that make squirrel tokens too, but like Otter's never going to play this card. Bat, I don't think is going to like the card all that much. I don't know. It's a fine card. I think it's probably a C level card. Maybe in some decks it's a B. Maybe in some decks it's a D. I would probably give it a C or a C plus and say you just kind of got to know when you have enough creatures to make this card work.
That's what I think too. I mean, if you get it early enough and you're all in on rabbits or bats or whatever, you should play it. I mean, if 3/4 or more of your creatures are one type, then yeah, Banner's going to do work. And if that's not the case, then it probably won't. Tangle Tumbler is next. It's 3 mana for a 6/6 vehicle artifact, uncommon. It has vigilance and it has 3 tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And then it says you can tap 2 untapped tokens you control to have Tangle Tumbler become an artifact creature until end of turn. So it doesn't have a crew ability otherwise?
No.
Or
you have to tap 2 tokens, which means rabbits, food tokens, or other tokens that you can get, but like, offspring, whatever. This looks like a build around B, where if you're going really hard on food, I could see this being a good payoff. It's pretty big, and it does have value over time. But it's probably like a build around C. It's just going to miss a lot of the times.
How in the world are food tokens crewing this? Like, shouldn't it have been creature tokens? That's weird.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Once you get too deep into like what the flavor of things fall apart sometimes.
They definitely do. Starforged Sword is next. It's 4 mana for an artifact equipment at uncommon, and it has gift a tapped fish. And when Starforged Storm enters, if the gift was promised, attach the sword to target creature you control, so you can get yourself a free equip out of the deal. And the equip creature gets +3/+3. And loses flying, so it's heavy. And the equip cost, yikes, it's 3. That's brutal, right? The fish really actually matters there, probably. Like you get 1 hit in, but then they get to chump with the fish.
Yep, that's kind of the joke.
And you can't put it on a flyer. This is cute, but I mean, to me, I can't imagine that this is a card that, has some big effect on winning games. I would give Starforged Sword a D. I can't, maybe even less. Like, I just cannot see this thing being like the game ender. What do you think?
I'm skeptical of this card. I think it's probably pretty good if you can get it onto a trample creature. Mm-hmm. I think that would go a long way. I think that most decks are going to find this to be a little too expensive to really want to use.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I could see, I could, the games where this card is good, it could be really good. It's very powerful. I guess the biggest concern is you're like, play this, gift them a fish, equip it, and then on their turn, they just kill or bounce your creature.
Totally. Oh my God.
It just sounds like
I can't even, yeah, no way. I'm out on Starforged Sword. I would give it an F. I'm not playing it.
All right. I think it's probably like a D, but that F is reasonable as well.
Lupin Flower Village is the first of the 5 villages that we have. There's one for each color. This is the white one. They all have they're all in common, and they all have the same mana stuff, which is that they tap for colorless or they tap for their color, in this case white, but you can only spend the mana to cast creature spells, and that's across the board for all 5 of them. But they all have activated abilities, so that's where we'll be focusing. The white one has 1 and a white, tap it and sacrifice it to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a bat, bird, mouse, or rabbit card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this thing turns into a card at some point. I mean, that covers a pretty wide range of creatures, and it's only 2 mana, tap, sack it. Not too bad in the late game.
Yeah. You do have to really pay attention to which spells you are. One of the decks yesterday, I played two of the white village. Mm-hmm. And I had 3 Banishing Lights, and I quickly cut all the villages because I was like, It is too bad that this cannot cast Banishing Light.
I see.
Like, I'm not gonna,
So what's the lesson there? Like that these are bad, or that you don't want multiples?
No, that make sure you don't have a lot of non-creature spells.
Okay.
In that color. So I ended up having in that same deck a black village that was excellent, and I kept it in. I can't play 5 planes and two white villages in a deck with 3 Banishing Lights. That's just not a good idea.
Okay, so keep tabs on that. But assuming that you have a bunch of white creatures in your deck, where do you put Lupin Flower Village?
Oh, it's like a B-.
Yeah,
it really does cash in for a card. I think the villages are all pretty strong. You just have to build such that you don't cut yourself off of spells too often.
Okay. The blue one activated ability is blue, tap it, surveil 2. But you can activate only if a bird, frog, otter, or rat entered the battlefield under your control this turn. It's kind of a lot, right? I mean, you need to tap this plus a land, so 2 lands, and then whatever you use to cast the animal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
Surveil 2 is nice, but
what this is going to do is it's going to put you in the late game in a spot where you can't really run out of gas, because you're going to play like one of these creatures. You're going to surveil 2. It's frequently going to find another one, and then you're going to end up, being able to just keep chaining it off. So I like Lilypad Village at probably like a C+ level.
Yeah.
It's probably the weakest in terms of the blue decks have a lot more spells. Mm-hmm. So, this is probably better in a blue-green deck that's just all creatures, whereas blue-red is not going to play Lilypad Village, but
right.
It is a powerful effect.
Mudflat Village is the black one. The activated ability is 1 and a black, tap it, sacrifice it, return target bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel card from your graveyard to your hand. That's nice.
Yeah.
Especially since black, is wanting to get stuff in the yard anyway, plus creatures just die. And that's only 2 mana. It's not sorcery speed either. You can do it on end step and then cast the thing. You can do it on your turn and cast it. Yeah, this looks good again. These are solid. I mean, again, assuming that they're not messing with your mana too much, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that getting this one is like a guaranteed card back too. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, you're not gambling at all. As long as you are meeting the bar of having this card in your deck and still being able to cast your stuff, this is like a B to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting a card back. Next is Rockface Village. This is the red one. And the activated ability is red, tap, and then target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn at sorcery speed. Holy smokes. So that's effectively adding 2 mana to it in the late game. But it also gets +1/+0.
But they're all hasted, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's only if you really need the haste part. But if you don't, you're still just getting a Valiant trigger and giving +1/+0.
Yeah. I mean, Rockface Village looks really nice in the red-white decks.
That seems like really the best one. Yeah, that's awesome. Another B for me for Rockface Village. Yeah. And then Oak Hollow Village is the green one. You pay green and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each frog, rabbit, raccoon, and squirrel you control that entered the battlefield this turn.
I got to go off with this and stocking the pantry. It was really nice.
Oh, that's sweet. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. So how good is this one? Because that is a lot of extra mana, though. It's like the window is only for when those creatures ETB'd that turn. Also, why does it say enter the battlefield on this one and entered on everything else? Anyway, go on.
I'm not sure. I guess it's just just in case of confusion or something like that.
Well, it worked. Yeah. This one seems to be powerful, but more narrow than like the Rockface Village and the Mudflat Village, for example.
Yeah, I think that it is a very powerful one. If your mana base can swing it, it's also a B-level card. Just getting to do that every time you play a new creature in the late game is really good. And these decks mess around with +1/+1 counters a fair amount as well.
What would you give it? C+, B- range for that guy?
B-, I think, yeah.
Yeah. 2 more cards. One of them is Hidden Grotto. This is a land at common. And when it enters the battlefield, you surveil 1 and it taps for colorless, or it filters. You can pay 1 mana and tap it to add a mana of any color. So does the surveil put it over the top here?
Yeah, I like the surveil. It lets you set up your foraging and your threshold and all that stuff. I've played this in 2-color decks that care about the surveil so far. Maybe that's wrong. I'm not sure yet, but I have liked it.
Okay, so C-, D+ for the Grotto?
Yeah, something like that, I would say.
Last card is called Uncharted Haven. This is a land at common. It enters the battlefield. It enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color, and it taps for 1 mana of the chosen color. This was in another set too. I can't remember, but
yeah, this is basically just Evolving Wilds,
right? That you don't have to shuffle.
Yeah, it doesn't work for threshold and stuff, but I guess that's what the Grotto is doing. So yeah, it works out just fine.
Yeah, again, my assumption is that this card is low value in this set. It has no other synergies. And from what we've seen, you don't need splashes that much. So this is just a card that you can use to smooth out your mana a bit, which matters. That's fine. 2-color deck can play one of these, no problem. I would assume it's like a C or a C- though for Uncharted Haven. Yeah.
I think the first tap land in a 2-color deck is usually fine. And maybe even the second. So it also depends. This set's really high on the number of 1-drops. A lot of good 1-drops in this set.
That's true.
Makes
especially
this
in white.
card worse. But like, I could see like a red-white deck's probably not going to play this, but blue-green deck is maybe a little more likely to.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it. This set looks sweet. I love the setting. I thought that of Redwall right away. I remember reading that when I was young. And this reminded me of that. I was a big Secret of Nim fan too. So this all kind of lines up with stuff that I like. And I love animals. So like this is all just hitting me right. So I'm kind of stoked for this one. My bar going in, and I'm hopeful based on what you've said, but my bar going in is I hope that the blue-green deck can do things, right? Because that is another kind of setup where like if that deck just gets simply outsped by the aggro decks, then it's kind of another casualty of a potentially cool archetype. So I'm hoping that deck can do some stuff, and if it can, I'll probably just be happy with that. Any last thoughts, Luis, before we sign off?
No, I liked my first experience with the set. I mean, that's going to be true of a lot of times that you first play a set, as we've mentioned, but this one has been fun. So I liked where it's going, and I like the theming, and I like the flavor. So I'm optimistic for the set. I think it'll be a fun one.
I am too. I think this one will be cool. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and joining us for our set reviews and other shows. We love having you along with us. If you want to support us directly, it's patreon.com/limited resources. We want to say thank you to Ultimate Guard for sponsoring the show as well. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. And Luis you'll be putting up videos on your YouTube channel from Bloomburrow right quick here.
One's already up.
One's up today. All right. So if you want to get your fix, you can head over to Luis's YouTube channel, which again is on the front page of lrcast.com. If you're not already subscribed to his channel, well, get subscribed. What are you doing? Quit wasting your life. And then you'll get automatically notified whenever he puts up a new video, which by the way is every single day. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
I just wanted to give a quick update on the Cube, Road to Cube Worlds and the Arena Open were all last weekend, and I did a really great weekend of losing at Magic. It was nice.
No,
dude, I got completely smashed. I did, I think, 9 Cube drafts. I lost in the finals twice. I didn't win a single one. So, and then there was so much demand that they aren't putting up the feeders this week either. So if you didn't get your tokens last weekend, you can't play any of the 64s for 2 weeks. So I'm pretty bummed about that.
Oh, no.
I even lost in the last draft. They'd already shut down entries, but you could finish the draft in progress. I'm in the finals. It's game 3. I sneak attack my opponent down to 1 life, and they have Mana Crypt in play.
Oh.
And I'm at 9, and they have a 3/3 flyer.
Uh-huh.
And they have like 2 cards in hand. They untap, win the flip, attack me down to 6, burst lightning me, fire blast me. And it was just like,
way.
I was like, ugh. And a haste creature wouldn't even work because I had 3 5/5s from World Spine Worm in play, untapped, ready to block.
Oh my God.
And it was just like, and then in the open, I drafted this, like, I went 3-1 in the first draft, drafted this sick energy deck after first picking Ether Revolt, just guy with 7 or 8 non-basic lands, like perfect mana, just 20 energy cards, and just lost a really close match at 1-0. So I went 1-1, didn't win any money there. And it was one of those weekends that it's like, all right, well, I got to refocus, I guess, take 2 weeks off Cube. And, I'm still playing Cubes, but I can't play in the Worlds thing because they shut the feeder league down. So I'm hoping next time that goes up, I'll have a little more luck with that. But you know what? If you're playing in these events and struggling, well, I am too. So it happens to everyone.